and tougher security measures are put into place. Other developments at this hour, a fuller accounting of the casualties. In New York City, 4,763 people are officially listed as missing, including all those on board the two crashed planes. Just 94 bodies have been recovered from the World Trade Center rubble so far. At the Pentagon, an estimated 190 people are dead, including the 64 people on the crashed plane there. In response to the tragedy, the National Football League has canceled this weekend's schedule. We now go to John Roberts at the White House. John?
The president currently out of the White House. He is visiting Washington Hospital Center, where he is talking with some of the victims of the plane crash at the Pentagon, and as well talking with some of the emergency personnel and hospital personnel who have been working such exhausting hours trying to tend to those many and varied injuries. In a conversation this morning with New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani and the Governor George Pataki, the president announced that he will be traveling to New York City tomorrow afternoon to get a first-hand look at the devastation there. But the main job for the president today, Dan, is to continue to build this global coalition against terrorism. From the Oval Office this morning, in what you characterized as his most extensive remarks in the crisis since it happened on Tuesday, the president said, "We have witnessed the first war of the 21st century. And we know that the world has changed. This is the war of the 21st century that the president has been warning about for the past 9 months." And he said, now that war has been declared against America, we will win.
I've been on the phone this morning, just like I was yesterday, and we'll be on this afternoon on the phone with leaders from around the world who express their solidarity with this nation's intention to rout out and to whip terrorism. They understand, fully understand, that an act of war was declared on the United States of America. They understand as well that that act could have easily been declared on them.
Dan, the president said this morning that hunting down and holding those accountable, holding those responsible accountable, would be the prime focus of this administration. Now, the president would not speak directly to any potential connection to Osama bin Laden when asked by correspondents. But privately, Dan, administration officials say there is good information leading them in that direction. And as time marches on, the information gets even better. Now, tomorrow, the president will declare a national day of prayer and remembrance, and he will lead a prayer service at the National Cathedral here in Washington before heading to New York City. In his Oval Office appearance this morning, the president was asked where his thoughts and prayers are at this moment. Well, Dan, the president said that his thoughts are with the nation. He knows the terrible tragedy that has occurred in America, and his heart goes out to not only those who have died and perished in this horrible attack, but to the victims' families as well. Now, the president is also going to Congress with a couple of requests today. He's seeking $20 billion in emergency funding for recovery and as well retaliation. He seems to be making some progress down the road toward that. He's also gone to Congress to ask them for solidarity, support from both houses of Congress and both parties for future military action. Dan, and we understand that that is progressing apace, and that there is a lot of support on Capitol Hill for that, and we may come out with that resolution later on today. Dan?
John Roberts, thanks. I know that you viewers in our audience understand mistakes happen, machinery doesn't work, things get a little fouled up, but it's very important to hear what the president said this morning. And what we're going to do when we get our tape problems sorted out here, we're going to play for you President Bush's answer to the question of what's been going through his mind, what his own thoughts are about what he has scheduled tomorrow as the National Day of Prayer and Remembrance. We will play that for you very shortly. We're sorry for the mistake, but we'll play it for you very quickly after we go to Bob Orr in Washington. Now, Bob, we're beginning to have the lifting of the constraints on U.S. air travel. So take us through exactly what the situation is right now.
Well, Dan, it's true. After an unprecedented 2-day national shutdown of the aviation system, it's beginning to come back online, but it's going to be very, very slow going. Don't expect to see very many flights, and at some airports across America today, there won't be any flights. We got word a short time ago, National Airport here in Washington is closed indefinitely. We expect no flights from Dulles International. There were some planes that did manage to board at airports around America after Secretary of Transportation Norm Mineta announced the lifting of the ban. We saw a couple of planes being loaded at Newark Airport, a Continental jet we witnessed. That's important because that's one of the airports where the hijackers gained entry to one of the planes that was used in the attack the other day. But in essence, as this slowly comes back online, each airline, each airport has to demonstrate it can meet new and more stringent, I should say, security requirements. Among the things that you'll see at airports when you try to travel, there'll be no passengers allowed past the screening points. You're likely to see in many airports armed guards standing sentry there. There'll be no curbside check-in of bags any longer. You may not be able to drive where you want to. Some parking garages may be closed. The behind-the-scenes things you don't see, they'll be scanning more bags, profiling more passengers. In the past, some of these things have been very controversial, and they've affected the economic side of the aviation quotient. But in this case, what the FAA is clearly saying is, sure, we recognize the need to get the system back. We know that symbolically and economically it's important, but we're going to do it on new terms. Passengers have not seen delays like they're going to see now, Dan, and it will be days, if not in some cases weeks, before there's any sense of normalcy, and even then it's going to be far different than what we've known.
Bob Orr in Washington. With U.S. airspace now officially open, people are trying to get home just about any way they can. CBS's Randall Pinkston is at Newark Airport in New Jersey. Randall?
Good morning, Dan. Well, to reiterate what Bob Orr just said, Newark Airport is busy, but not nearly as busy as it normally would be on a normal day. Nothing here is normal anymore. Shortly after 10:30 this morning, at approximately 10:40, the first plane since the national shutdown, the first plane landed here, a Continental Airlines plane. There were no passengers on board. Continental is bringing that flight and several others into Newark to be ready for departures when they resume normal operations. We can tell you that for Newark Airport, there will be no departures before mid-afternoon at the earliest. Other airlines are also ferrying planes in. Of course, a lot of the activity here at Newark and around the nation will be dependent upon when planes can take off from other airports, from other destinations. Newark officials have canvassed several airlines, and the story from all of them is about the same. American, Delta, Northwest, TWA, United, US Air, all planning limited activity. American not planning any outbound flight activity before 3 o'clock this afternoon, and they have no information yet on the exact time of departures. Delta is ferrying in a flight in from Charleston this morning. They don't expect any departures until this afternoon. Continental, which is the largest airline operating here at Newark, expects to have some 31 arrivals. 11 of those will be from international destinations. Inside Newark Terminal right now, there are still several dozen people who have been stranded here since that national shutdown. Of course, they, like many people at airports around the nation, wondering when they would be able to get on to their destinations. But there's so much work to be done, so many new procedures to be put in place, parking restrictions, baggage check-in, as Bob Orr has mentioned, that life certainly will not be normal anytime soon, not only at airports, but nowhere in America. Dan?
Randall Pinkston at Newark Airport in New Jersey. We now know a lot more about the CBS News correspondent Jim Stewart has been working through the night and this morning to come up with a lot of new information. Has it for you now, Jim?
Dan, you're correct. There have been some significant developments over the night and this morning. Let me give you the latest that we have. Number one, there still have been no arrests in the United States or overseas that we are aware of that would connect anybody to the attacks on Tuesday. Some significant new information just in the last hour, though, from intelligence sources who say they have thus far discovered no evidence whatsoever of any state sponsorship in this attack. That's critical because some people have been suggesting that perhaps this was simply too big a job for Osama bin Laden. Thus far, no evidence of that. Authorities have identified now every one of the hijackers that were on board the 4 aircraft. They know which aircraft they were on. They know their names. They know their nationalities. We are told that some were apparently Egyptians and have been connected, we are told, to the Egyptian Islamic fundamentalist group. That is critical to investigators because that group has been credited with being the operational arm of the Osama bin Laden organization that attacked the USS Cole last year. We are told that at least one, possibly more, were citizens of Saudi Arabia. We are told that they are investigating the possibility, and we stress possibility because they do, that there may have been some aborted hijackings, attacks that were scheduled but simply did not take place because of a variety of reasons. People perhaps lost their nerve or perhaps left the aircraft, missed the aircraft, or the aircraft were grounded after the other attacks were reported. We are told that some of these hijackers were living in the United States for more than a year. Prior to these attacks. We are also told that they are anxiously awaiting the recovery of the black boxes. They have thus far recovered none of the 4 black boxes. These, of course, Dan, would give them some clue as to what conversations were taking place inside the cockpits.
Jim,
Dan?
Jim, if you will, I want to come back to you in a minute because you're loaded with information today. But there's been a breaking development here in New York City, and a very uplifting one. And for it, we go to Byron Pitts, who's in Lower Manhattan. Byron?
Dan, I'm at the base of what's left of Tower Number 1. A few minutes ago, all the rescue workers broke out in very loud applause. A rescue worker found one firefighter alive. They walked him out. About a minute ago, they found a second firefighter in the remains of building number 1. He, too, was alive. In fact, Dan, he walked out. At this point, they're trying to clear a way to allow that firefighter to make his way. You can begin to hear, Dan, hopefully those applause. Those are construction workers and police officers and volunteers who are all standing here waiting to see this man walk past. When they found that first firefighter about 3 minutes ago, loud roars broke out. It looks like the man is making his way. Oh, I can see him now. He's dirty. He looks extremely tired, a slight limp. He's surrounded by and police officers as they bring him up. You hear those applause. As they get louder, that means the firefighter is moving in this direction. I can tell you, are applauding. They're shaking his hand. I believe the man himself is crying. Right now, they're trying to get a medic to him. Right. He says he's okay. He's telling everyone he's okay. They're bringing a stretcher over to him now to give him some assistance. It was, again, they pulled these 2 firefighters from the top of the debris, or what remains of Tower Number 1. It was the first bit of good news any of these men or women have heard this morning. Now that those 2 firefighters have been taken away from this scene, people are shaking hands, and now they're turning back.
Two New York City firefighters found alive in the debris within the last few minutes. There's no way to give you a close-up picture of it that Byron Pitts on the scene has been describing so well and so eloquently. The scene is these 2 firefighters are found. One of them comes out standing straight up, walking with a slight limp. And you heard the cheers of joy. There's been very little to cheer about these last 2 days. And finally this morning, something to bring a smile, applause, And it's here. Alive. And who knows how many other people there may be alive in that debris. Trying our best to pick up some of the audio here.
Dan, can you still hear me?
I do hear you, Byron Pitts. There's some audio in the background that I thought might be someone, either one of the rescued firemen or someone else, but it breaks up and is too far in the distance to be audible.
Okay. Dan, here's what I know at this point. They've taken those firefighters to an area away from where I'm standing at right now. I can see from my position at the top of the debris of what's left of tower number 1, at least 30 rescue workers. They're working it frantically, trying to get to something or someone. They're pulling back debris. Standing with me now is a New York union carpenter, Juan Sierra. Juan has been here for the last 2 days. Yesterday, he had one of those glorious moments that have occurred in the midst of so much misery. Juan, tell me again what happened yesterday.
Basically, what we were doing was in areas, praying, hoping, lifting all the steel. You're here now. You see what's been going on. You're here with the action now. And I wish that the media would be able to come in and show the tragedy.
Tell me again about what you found yesterday.
Oh, we found a young lady in the stairwell alive. She came out well. A couple of bruises, and that's basically it. She, like I told her, God's got a purpose for her on this earth.
All right. Juan Sierra, thank you so much. A union carpenter. Okay, thank you very much. A union carpenter from Brooklyn. Independent contractor who put aside his own work, his own career to come down here and volunteer. We've talked to thousands of men and women this morning who've done the exact same thing. Put aside their own lives in hopes of finding people alive. Dan, they found two. No indication if they think they've reached an area where there might be more. But we'll keep you posted as the information becomes available to me.
Byron Pitts in Lower Manhattan. 2 New York City firefighters found alive in the debris within the last few minutes. And a woman found alive in the stairwell within the last 24 hours. No one should be misled. In that debris and rubble are many, many bodies. Most of the people missing have to be presumed dead. But, as we've been saying for the last 2 days, in situations such as this, sometimes people are found alive in the ruins. And just very recently, 2 New York City firefighters found alive coming out of the rubble at this scene in Lower Manhattan. Now, we want to go back to Washington and Jim Stewart to bring us up to date on the investigation, but just before doing that, Ed Bradley, give us a quick summation of where the rescue and recovery effort is.
Well, Dan, that's why they continue to call this a rescue operation as much as a recovery operation, because of the hope that they will get some people out. So far, they've rescued 7 people, including the 2 firemen who just came out. But the reality is, because of the searing heat from this thing and the crushing impact of floor after floor coming down, that they're not going to find too many people alive in there. So far, 94 bodies have been recovered. 46 people have been identified. There's still 4,763 people reported missing, and they found 70 body parts. Just as an indication of what can be expected, the city has collected some 30,000 body bags. They said this morning there were 300 firefighters still missing. I guess we can say now that 2 have been found. There are 298 firefighters missing, 60 police officers missing.
Well, we take our joy where we can find it and when we can find it. And at this moment, there's joy about 2 firefighters found alive. On one point, in our coverage yesterday, we were talking to structural engineers and others about what had happened with the Twin Towers. And they explained that it wasn't the force of the aircraft hitting either the towers that caused the collapse, that the buildings withstood the impact of the aircraft. But these planes scheduled to fly from the East Coast to the West Coast were loaded with aviation fuel, which is not like your average automobile.
And because of that, the temperatures went up to 2,000 degrees in there.
Enough to melt the steel structure of the building, and that means, and there's no gentle way to say this, literally evaporated some of the humans who were in that building. And that means that some of the bodies will never be found. They will literally
that's the reality. They will be able to identify some bodies. Many, if not most, certainly many, will never be identified.
Let's go back to Washington and Jim Stewart. Jim, you were bringing us up to date on the investigation. I think when we left your report before we broke off to report about the found alive firemen in the debris, you were saying that they now have identified, they believe they identified each and every hijacker and even traced them back to their country of origin.
That's correct, Dan. They have identified them by name, they have identified them by country of origin, and they have told us that some apparently were citizens of Saudi Arabia, some were apparently Egyptian, specifically members of the Egyptian Islamic fundamentalist group, the group that has claimed or not claimed responsibility but believed to be responsible for the attack on the USS Cole earlier this year. Dan, we neglected to mention, however, one group that has not been found to be among these hijackers, and there were no Iraqis that we are told of. Very quickly, I can tell you the points that are emerging this morning. I'm reminded, though, listening to the message from Brian Pitts by his telephone, of a telephone conversation or communication that the FBI is trying to sort out itself this morning. They have a communique from a pilot aboard one of the hijacked aircraft before that plane crashed. It is garbled, but apparently there is a conversation in the cockpit that may involve the hijackers. We're told that it's terribly distorted. They are trying to figure that out this morning. We are also told that the cell phone calls that we've been hearing about from the planes themselves, from passengers before they crashed, at one point we have all speculated that there were an enormous number of these calls. It turns out now there in fact were very few, and they are not incrementally, we're told, important to this investigation. In other words, no significant clues have come down from those. And finally, I would think we need to clean up a little bit of the reporting that's going on now as best we can. And the number 50 is in 50 suspects, 50 hijackers and their accomplices has been used, and that frankly they say they have no confirmation of that. Dan?
No confirmation of that. It was a front page story on the Los Angeles Times this morning. There's a briefing just beginning in downtown New York with and about firefighters. We go to it live.
My firefighters and the fire officers, as well as the police officers and the other emergency people who are putting their lives on the line right now, crawling through that rubble, putting their lives in danger to try to save people that are in there right now. I also want to say that the rescuers that are in there, on behalf of our union, we're asking you to be very careful. Everything in there is subject to a collapse, and we're concerned about your safety too. And while you're there crawling through the rubble to try to recover one of our own or one of the civilians who have tragically been involved in this event, we don't want to see another firefighter, police officer, or rescue worker killed because they've been put in a situation or went into a situation that basically put their lives in danger. We do this for a living day in and day out. We know the dangers, but this is going to be a long process. It's going to take a long time for us to reach finality with this, and we have a lot of things ahead of us. I want to thank the press for all the support you've been giving us along the way. It's been tremendous that we're not having people on top of the site interfering with the rescue purposes. Our men and women are in there doing their best. The doctors and nurses are doing what they can. We're recovering people on a daily basis. And as far as I'm concerned, I think this process is going to be going on for a long time. We're here today also to bring the our International Association of Firefighters, who has offered their services, both financial and with their staffing, to come in and be assistance to us in the city. They're willing to do everything and anything to help us out. They've dealt with some of the federal problems that we may address with some of our families and the spouses of the families. They're dealing with the potential enormity of the possible casualties we have here, and dealing with the federal problems that may lead with that. And we'd like to have them come in now. But before I do that, I'd like to introduce Pete Gorman. He's the president of the Fire Officers Association, who also has many of his members trapped in the rubble.
Thank
you, Kevin. I'm Pete Gorman, the president of Local 854, the Fire Officers Union. I have one message today, and it's 2 words, and it's very simple.
John Frankel, our CBS News correspondent, is standing by at this briefing.
Thank you. Thank you.
This is basically for the Firefighters Union to thank people.
Thank you to the nurses and doctors. I just have to echo what Kevin said. Thank you to the building trades. The iron workers are doing an absolutely miraculous job. And I can't say enough about the iron workers and the people in the construction trades that are down there with the rescue crews moving heavy steel. It's an absolutely unbelievable sight for firefighters and police officers to see that, because we need them. I just have to say, our guys can't come to the microphone, so Kevin and I will do that. And we're just worried about their safety right now. We're worried about the families. The department is overwhelmed, our department. We lost our top leadership. This union's overwhelmed. The locals are overwhelmed. We reached out to our international. We need help. We need help from our international, from every firefighter. We need help from the mayor's office. We need help from the governor. And everyone's there for us. I just want to say thank you, you know. If you have one part of this interview on TV, please do this. Father Michael Judge was the spiritual leader of this department. He was a man of true faith. I'm going to read a prayer, and I have to do this because Michael's the man that we lean to. He would be there for us right now, and he always said God had a reason for doing things. God took my fighter that we lost here because God wanted to test us, and he says, you don't have Michael with us, but take the faith that he gave us, and he gave it to us. And I'm going to read this prayer, and it's funny. This is what Michael Judge was all about. He said, Lord, take me where you want me to go. Let me meet who you want me to meet. Tell me what you want me to say, and keep me out of your way. That was Michael Judge. He has given us the faith to get through this, and this department will get through this, and this city will get through this, and with the help of everyone from construction trades to anyone handing out a bottle of water, I want to say thank you. And I want to say thank you to Michael for what he gave us. And he will get this department and this city through this. He had a very simple saying besides this prayer. He said, if you want to make God laugh, tell him what you're doing tomorrow. Thank you. I want to introduce behind me the man that we lean to. Secretary-Treasurer Vinnie Bolin, who's our former New York City firefighter. But I want to introduce to you the president of the International Association of Firefighters, representing every professional firefighter in this country, in the United States and Canada, Harold Schaeferger. Harold.
Can you spell your last name, please, sir?
SCHAITBERGER. B-E-R-B is the boy, E-R-G-E-R.
Harold?
Harold.
And where are you based?
Washington, D.C.
Sir, can you address the news that we've just gotten that 2 firefighters have walked out from the debris?
I can only tell you it's not confirmed, but while we were standing here, we did receive a call, but an unconfirmed call that may have just occurred.
I imagine this is only encouraging news because as we've spoken to many of the firefighters in the New York Fire Department, they have not given up hope, and they say that's why they continue to go down for a second, a third, a fourth trip into the rubble.
Let me just say this. The firefighters of this city, firefighters in this country, but particularly this city, are never going to give up until every effort is made to make a rescue of any civilians or any firefighters that are in that rubble.
You're watching and listening to CBS News coverage of the attack on America, live from New York.
Whatever it's going to take.
In progress in Lower Manhattan, the picture is a picture of the scene where 2 New York City firefighters, within the hour, were found alive in the debris. At least one of them walked out under his own power. Now, in the background is the president of the International Firefighters Union and Brotherhood,
First, I'll make a couple of comments.
who is thanking those who are still working in the debris.
Vinnie Bolin, our
And so let's pick up a little more of it live and hear what he has to say.
Is a man not only who has a heavy responsibility for all the firefighters in the United States and Canada in his role, the former president of Local 854 here in New York City, and a New York City firefighter and fire officer. This is a disastrous day for all of us, but for Vinny, I know this has been particularly a heavy heart in dealing with. I want to say, first of all, this nation should thank God for every firefighter in every community, because what they watched on Tuesday, the darkest day in the history of the greatest fire departments in the world, its darkest day, the most catastrophic, tragic incident in the history of the world's fire service, and again, this great city's fire department. It'll change every one of our lives forever. Our lives will never be the same. But we do have to deal with this. And I'm here on behalf of the 250,000 men and women of our great union to make sure that we're bringing in every resource that we can for our members. That's going to include to work in cooperation with this great fire department and city administration to assist them in any way we can. We've assembled some teams around the country for critical incident stress work that this department and our members are going to need. We're going to be pulling together our grief counselors from around the nation who have experience in this business of ours and understands the uniqueness of it, to be prepared to work with the families who are going to ultimately be dealing with a loss.
Well, you've been listening to the news conference and statements of leaders of the firefighters. New York City has the largest firefighting department in the country. It is believed well over 16,000 New York City firemen. As many as 300 plus may have died in the ruins and rubble of the World Trade Center. But the headline of the hour is that 2 New York City firefighters have been found alive in the debris. Byron Pitts is on the scene, and we go to him again. Byron?
Well, Dan, the number of firefighters who are standing on top of what remains of Tower Number 1, that number has increased dramatically. It appears from my vantage point there are probably close to 100 men standing on top of the remains. But the work is slowed down. I think there was some optimism after they came across that first firefighter and then the second, that they might find more people alive in that area. But the work there is slowed down.
Indeed.
The firefighters... Yes, Sam?
No, go ahead, please.
Oh, the firefighters that were brought out have been taken away from this scene. Originally, they were taken into one of the side buildings. All the windows are blown out. I can't even make out the name of the building. That became their triage area on site, but they've since taken them away. There was real enthusiasm here and excitement when they brought those men out. People applauded. You saw grown men begin to cry. Strangers hugged. The first firefighter that I saw, they had to carry him. He was alert, but he did appear to be dazed. The second firefighter, soaked in soot and sweat, he managed to walk out on his own. A slight limp, but back straight. A moment of perspective, though. When the second firefighter came out, buddies patting him on his back, he stopped for a minute to catch his breath, and he leaned against a tractor-trailer truck. I tried to make my way over to talk to him, but they took him away. I then realized that tractor-trailer truck he had been leaning against was the vehicle they were using for bodies that they found. There were a number of bodies inside that truck. And
Byron Pitts, in an emotional moment at an emotional time. in Lower Manhattan as 2 firefighters have been found alive and are out. And they come out beside a truck that has the bodies of some others. But as the word spread that 2 firefighters have been found alive in the debris, there were cheers. Those of you who have been with us heard those cheers in the background, cheers of absolute sheer relief and joy of those who have been working so hard to search for anyone who might be alive. And the spirit now in this section of Lower Manhattan, as the word spreads, is dig harder, dig faster, dig deeper. Because these firemen are saying to one another, some of our brothers may still be in there alive. We've just seen 2 of them walk out in at least a minor miracle in Lower Manhattan. It's 12:30, just past the 12:30 mark in the east. And in keeping with what we've been trying to do all along, we try to bring you up to date on the most important developments in the story at the half-hour mark and at the top of the hour. So very quickly, all told, almost 500 confirmed deaths now in the attack on America. Mayor Rudolph Giuliani this morning said that there are 4,763 people missing in the ruins of the World Trade Center. That includes passengers on the planes. 94 bodies have actually been recovered in New York. If this 4,763 figure translates into deaths, this along with the approximately 190 to 200 deaths at the Pentagon, that would bring a possible death toll for the attack on America to something over 5,000. That's the extrapolation. Now, extrapolations don't always turn out to be accurate. Ed?
Just to give you some perspective on this tragedy, Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, 2,390 Americans were killed on that day. When the Titanic went down, 1,500 people were killed. If this is indeed 5,000 people, you can imagine the scope of this tragedy.
Absolutely. But we pride ourselves on trying to emphasize what the facts are and what we do not know. The facts are that 94 bodies have been recovered here in New York. 30 of those have been identified, and that there are 4,763 missing, and we just did the arithmetic for you. So if you play that out, it could be that the death toll will be over 5,000. We simply do not know. But that explains why Mayor Giuliani, about 24 hours ago, made a request for some 6,000 body bags for New York. For more news from the scene of where this rescue and recovery effort is underway, we go to John Frankel. John, what's happening where you are at the moment?
Well, Dan, we are still hearing some of those members and representatives of the firefighters union talk and address the media here. Again, they had only just a few minutes ago gotten word of the 2 firefighters that were pulled out alive from the wreckage, as Byron Pitts reported. And we can tell you that this has just got to be encouraging news for the fresh teams of firefighters that we see every hour or so, trucked in here, loading up their equipment, putting on their gear, and heading down towards the site in an effort to try and recover not just firefighters, but civilians as well. And as we have spoken to those firefighters over the last 24 hours, they tell you they do not give up hope. This is what they want to be doing. It's not just the New York Fire Department firefighters, but those coming from all around the Northeast, across the river from New Jersey as well, Rhode Island, everybody coming here trying for recovery, and that's the reason why, for those 2 firefighters that walked out. Dan?
John Frankel, live in Lower Manhattan. Now, we expect to see pictures of President Bush visiting the Washington Hospital Center at any moment now. The president, very visible this day. He spoke at the White House this morning. Now he's going to make a visit to the Washington Hospital Center. You recall yesterday he went over to the Defense Department and with Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld toured around, shaking hands, taking a look at the scene of destruction there. The nation's skies, we emphasize, are officially now reopened to commercial air traffic, but it's going to be slow coming back. And anyone who even thinks about going to an airport should get there about 2 hours early. Here's the president at the Washington Hospital Center.
Our country's praying for each and every one there. We're praying for their families. Some of the folks could talk, and they described the horror of the incident in the moment. They talked about escaping, going through fire, and crawling through debris. That it's clear that they were fighting for their survival then, and like every patient up there, they're still fighting for their survival. And it's just a sobering moment for Laura and me, but I want to again thank the hospital, the docs, the nurses, and of course, again tell the families that the nation prays for those who have been injured during this unbelievable act of terror. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Let's go.
President Bush with the First Lady, Laura Bush, at Washington Hospital Center. He's been visiting some of the survivors, victims of the hijacked plane crash at the Pentagon. Let's go now to Tracy Smith, who's at St. Vincent's Hospital here in New York City. Tracy.
Hi, Dan. We just heard reports about the two firefighters, and we are waiting to see if they might be brought here to St. Vincent's. We're still not sure. The hospital staff says that they are ready if they do come here to treat them. Obviously, this is very good, encouraging news to families who are desperately seeking any word about their missing relatives. I'm standing here with Joe Tesey, who is looking for his sister, Mary Ellen.
Yes.
You heard the news of the firefighters.
We heard the news of the firefighters. It's very, very heartening. A cousin of mine from California just saw on a website that there is a Marie Tesey, and we're hoping that that's Mary Ellen. She was in the stairwells. Her coworkers saw her in the stairwells. Can't imagine that she didn't get out, and we've been trying frantically to find her.
Now, Joe, you know you've had rumors before.
Yes.
That you thought she was okay. You expected to see her
Yes,
face.
yes.
And it didn't happen.
Yes.
Are you prepared for this to be another letdown?
We're prepared for it to be another letdown. We're prepared to keep searching until we find news of her one way or the other. We are really concerned that she's somewhere hurt and needs us, and that we can't get to her because we don't know where she is. And that's our major concern right now, is finding her.
I know that you are extremely close to your sister.
Yes.
Do you have a gut feeling?
It's interesting. My mother is convinced that she's fine, and feels like God is telling her that she's fine. We just need to go find her. My sister Teresa and I have been wandering the city for the last couple days, and it's harder to keep the hopes up when you are just wandering around looking for somebody. But we're going to follow that and just try really hard to find her.
You're going to keep doing it.
We're going to keep doing it.
Your mom is driving cross country right now to get here?
Yes. My mother was at her sister's funeral in Los Angeles, and she and her sisters and my uncle are driving back to the East Coast.
All right. Are you telling people about the firefighters? What kind of, is this starting kind of rumors of encouragement?
Yes, it is. And frankly, every bit of news is good news one way or the other. Mary Ellen is the most wonderful person I've ever known, and she's a great individual, got a great relationship with God.
Joe, we wish you the best.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Dan.
Tracy Smith. Ed Bradley. Numbers for people who want to inquire about missing people.
Dan, there are a lot of people like him who are wandering around the city looking for missing relatives. They have established a missing person information number, 866-856-4167. The police have a number, 212-741-4626. And then the New York City number is 212-560-2730. They've also opened a victim center, which is located at the Armory, which is at Lexington Avenue and 26th Street. And they also have a website, which is www.wtcfamilies.org.
We pass that along. Thanks, Ed. We pass that along because, when they're missing people, they have relatives and friends all over the country, and people want to know where they can call, and that's where they can call. Let's go back to the White House and John Roberts. John?
Well, Dan, the president has made every attempt to be very visible today. His visit to the Washington Hospital Center that you showed videotape of just a couple of minutes ago, the second time that he has spoken publicly. Earlier, it was in the Oval Office following a publicly aired telephone conversation between the president and Governor Pataki and Mayor Giuliani of New York City, in which the president announced that he will be going to New York City tomorrow to personally tour the devastation following leading a National Day of Prayer and Remembrance at the National Cathedral here in Washington. Now, we tried to bring you a little statement that the president made in the Oval Office after he was talking about the trip to New York City. He was asked by one correspondent where his thoughts and prayers were at this moment. Here's what the president said.
I'm a loving guy, and I'm also someone, however, who's got a job to do, and I intend to do it. And this is a terrible moment, but this country will not relent until we have saved ourselves and others from the terrible tragedy that came upon America.
Thank you. Thank you. The president visibly upset there in the Oval Office, but we must understand that there is a tremendous burden on his shoulders, given the scope and the enormity of the attacks on America. There's no question that the president will have to respond militarily, and the response is going to have to be of some magnitude. To that end, the president has spent yesterday, this morning, and will spend this afternoon working the phones, trying, as his father did 11 years ago, to build a global coalition against terrorism and to build support for America and any military action that it might have to take. He's spoken a couple of times with President Vladimir Putin of Russia. He's spoken with Chinese President Jiang Zemin. He's spoken with our allies in Europe. And you'll remember yesterday, NATO invoked Article 5 of the NATO Charter, saying that an attack against one is an attack against all. President Bush this morning from the Oval Office saying that we have just witnessed the first war of the 21st century. There is universal approval of the statements I have made. This is talking about this being an act of war against the United States, and I'm confident there will be universal approval of the actions that this government takes. Dan?
John Roberts, we take you back down to Lower Manhattan, where there is news, and this time, not good news. Just a short while ago, 2 firefighters were found alive in the rubble. At this moment, 1 body has been found in the rubble. John Ashcroft, the Attorney General, is beginning a briefing in Washington with the FBI Director. We go live to that now.
Unspeakable violence and outrage, but also a day of heroism and sacrifice. As endangered men and women struggled to make their way out of burning, collapsing buildings, firemen and policemen, emergency rescue personnel struggled to make their way in to those structures. Many, and we don't know how many yet, never made it out of the buildings. Even as we continue to hold out hope that more of these brave Americans will be found alive, it is my duty as Attorney General to begin to process the provision of relief to the families of public safety officers who sacrificed so that others might survive the attacks of September the 11th. The Public Safety Officers Benefits Act of 1976 provides for approximately $150,000 in benefits to the families of law enforcement officers, firemen, emergency response squad members, ambulance crew members who are killed in the line of duty. This morning, the President of the United States, President George W. Bush, directed me immediately to implement procedures to streamline application processes and approval processes of claims for benefits under this act. Pursuant to the President's directive, the Department of Justice this morning has taken the following actions to expedite the delivery of benefits to public safety officers' families. First, the existing regulations under the Public Safety Officers Benefits Act requires that officers' families and employing agencies fill out individual forms certifying that the officer was killed in the line of duty and that no disqualifying circumstances were present, and that the officer was in fact related to the family members seeking the benefits. These regulations direct the Bureau of Justice Assistance in the Justice Department to give substantial weight to evidence presented by federal, state, and local agencies and to resolve in favor of payment any reasonable doubt concerning the circumstances of the officer's permanent disability or death. In view of the unprecedented loss of life and the debilitating injuries to public safety officers, I have directed, pursuant to the President's request, that this process be streamlined in this case. I am directing the Office of Justice Programs to exercise the full scope of its direction and its discretion under the statute and regulations to accept applications, consider evidence justifying claims, and to process prompt payment of benefits. In cases in which benefits are sought by survivors of officers killed in the line of duty on September 11, I am directing that blanket certifications from executives of public safety agencies be considered as evidence of eligibility without requiring further individualized documentation. In addition, the family claim form will be abbreviated and streamlined. Secondly, the Department of Justice's Office of Justice Programs is immediately making available additional resources to see that the claims of fallen officers' families are processed as quickly as possible. Staff are being brought to New York from a variety of other settings to assist in case processing. Second, a separate computer database is being established to expedite and monitor the case processing. Third, lawyers from the Office of Justice Programs are immediately reviewing all cases from New York to make sure that those cases move as quickly as possible. Office of Justice Programs, fourth, staff members are being sent to New York to assist with family contacts and the assembly of claim packages, including the gathering of pertinent records. The Office of Justice Program representatives will be available on site, if requested, to pre-certify claim packages in terms of the completeness of those packages. These representatives will also work with the Treasury Department to expedite the payments to families once claims are approved. The provision of benefits is an insufficient but a necessary response on behalf of the American people to the unknown number of individuals who fought fires, law enforcement officers, and medical rescue personnel who died answering the call of their fellow citizens on September the 11th. It is President Bush's and my hope that the actions that we have taken today will provide a measure of relief to the husbands and wives and children that have been left behind. I know that it is the nation's hope that this assistance will stand as a gesture of the inexpressible gratitude that so many Americans feel, as well as a small tribute to the honor of the sacrifice of those who were willing to lose their lives so that others might be saved. Additionally, today I announced with the Treasury Department a step that has been taken to provide additional security at airports across the country. As airports reopen and as travel is resumed, there will be substantially increased security presence on the ground at designated security checkpoints throughout the country. The Departments of Justice and Treasury have deployed hundreds of U.S. Marshals, individuals from the U.S. Marshal Service, U.S. Border Patrol, and U.S. Customs officials as part of a broad effort by federal law enforcement authorities to provide a larger police presence at airports in addition to the heightened security procedures already put into effect. We will take all precautions necessary to protect American travelers. Finally, our nation calls on us in times like this to be at our best. If we are to prevail in difficult times like this, we must be at our best. Since Tuesday, the Justice Department has received reports of violence and threats of violence against Arab Americans and other Americans of Middle Eastern and South Asian descent. We must not descend to the level of those who perpetrated Tuesday's violence by targeting individuals based on race, religion, or national origin. Such reports of violence and threats are in direct opposition to the very principles and laws for which the United States of America stands, and such reports of violence and threats of violence will not be tolerated. I now have a few updates with regard to the ongoing investigation. Legal attachés of the FBI around the world are receiving enormous cooperation from law enforcement authorities in the host countries that are cooperating with us to assist us in following up on leads. We have also received numerous offers of help from other countries if we need those elements of assistance, and we are grateful for the assistance that has been offered and the assistance that has been rendered. With regard to federal law enforcement personnel casualties, there is an FBI agent assigned to the New York field office who remains missing. 3 U.S. Marshals who are assigned to the Southern District of New York sustained minor injuries. We are also in the process of collecting information nationwide regarding the loss of life and casualties among law enforcement personnel. As of this morning, the FBI's Leads hotline has received 2,055 phone calls. Some of these leads have been helpful to the investigation. The website, which was opened virtually immediately after the crisis, has received more than 22,700 suggested tips. The FBI is working thousands and thousands of leads. As of this moment, none of the black boxes has been recovered yet. However, we believe retrieval of the black box at the Somerset County location is the most feasible in the short term. Last but not least, the total number of hijackers, to our best estimate and our best knowledge given the information at this time, on the 4 planes that crashed was at least 18, unless contradicted by evidence which we wouldn't anticipate. 2 planes had 5 hijackers and 2 other planes had 4 hijackers each. The director of the FBI, Mr. Mueller, is here with me, and we would be pleased to respond to your questions.
All the hijackers, were they ticketed passengers? And if not, do you know how they got on the planes?
Yes, they were ticketed passengers.
Are you convinced, based on the evidence in Florida and Boston and elsewhere, that the body was or may have been behind this?
I'm not prepared to identify or to comment on persons ultimately responsible at this time.
How many people at this point are detained around the country, and why are these potential accomplices, Mr. Director, of such concern to the Bureau?
Well, I can't give you a specific number. What has happened, as I indicated yesterday, that we're, as a result of following up leads, we're interviewing a number of people. And in the course of doing those interviews, we find that a number of the individuals, when asked for identification and the like, are out of status. And when we find somebody out of status...
This is CBS News coverage, continuing coverage of the attack on America.
That is the policy and procedures we're following.
This is the News on 6, a special edition. Attack on America.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Leanne Taylor. We're going to break away from national programming for just a moment. We want to take a couple of minutes to update you on the latest angles involved in the connection with the attack on America. Obviously, the biggest impact of the attack in the Tulsa area has been the suspension of air service. FAA officials reopened the national airspace this morning at a little bit after 10 o'clock. For more on that, we go now live to Tulsa International Airport and Paul Sorrell. Paul?
Leanne, things are very calm, cool, and collected and slow here at the Tulsa International Airport, but we're about to get some action, and we're going to take a live picture of the tarmac right now. So just because a United Airlines flight that was diverted here from Atlanta is scheduled to take off any minute now for LA, so we want to be on the runway in case that happens. We can also tell you that we saw those passengers board that flight about 11:40 this morning. There were around 25 people that got on board. They were called at their hotel about 6:15, told to come to the airport. They started arriving about 9:30. Many of them are in good spirits. They say their hotel and the people of Tulsa have been very good to them during their 2-day layover. Some of them do have strong feelings.
The hijackers have received, did they receive any training here in the United States?
It is our belief and that the evidence indicates that flight training was received in the United States and that their capacity to operate the aircraft was substantial. It's very clear that on our country were well conducted and conducted in a technically proficient way. It is not easy to land these kinds of aircraft.
Any other issues related to this attack that we might want the Security Council to take up?
Is briefing reporters at the Justice Department. You're hearing the voice of Secretary of State Colin Powell, who is also holding a news conference. Let's go to Secretary of State Powell.
Come forward and responded in one way or another. The President has been on the phone constantly, as have I, talking to leaders around the world, and we are getting a solid expression not only of condolences and support, but of action. They want to work with us, not only in this specific case of what happened on the 11th of September, but in response to the general recognition that terrorism is a crime against all civilization. Terrorism is a crime against all humanity. It knows no ethnic, religious, or other national or geographic boundaries, and we must see it in that context, and that's why we are calling it a war. I have also been on the phone within the last 2 hours with Prime Minister Sharon and Chairman Arafat, and with Foreign Minister Shimon Peres of Israel, trying to move forward the process of a ceasefire in the region, trying to begin those meetings that we have been talking about, which would lead to implementation of the Mitchell Plan. I'm still hopeful that something can be done in the next several days to have that first meeting, and we will be in close touch with the leaders as the next days unfold. In addition to the United Nations Security Council resolution I mentioned, the General Assembly has passed its resolution 56-1. We will be having a meeting with the Russians in the near future when Mr. Armitage, Deputy Secretary Armitage, travels to Moscow next week, and Mr. Bouster will give you an announcement on that a little later for the U.S.-Russian Working Group meeting on Afghanistan. We have been in very close touch with the Pakistani government. Deputy Secretary Armitage met with Pakistani representatives again this morning, and I expect to speak with President Musharraf in the very near future, in the next several hours, if I'm able to reach him, to discuss the situation and exchange views on the situation in the region. Our embassies are all hard at work. There have been some closures, and they go down and come back up in response to threat conditions. But our plan is to be actively engaged around the world and not let this heightened sense of tension affect our ability to do our job. And so we are encouraging all of our ambassadors to do smart things, to take all necessary safety precautions, and to make sure their security is intact, but at the same time to continue doing America's business throughout the world. I think I'll stop at that point and take your questions.
Could I pursue Pakistan with you a bit? The president there has made some general statement about cooperation. What does the United States want from Pakistan? And frankly, I'm confused whether the U.S. sees Pakistan as an ally or, as the patterns of global terrorism pointed out, a place where terrorist groups get training. Or is it a mixture?
We have provided to the Pakistani government a specific list of things that we think would be useful for them to work on with us. And I will be discussing that list with the President of Pakistan later this afternoon.
Mr. Secretary, can I, as you said, since the attacks, you've been receiving lots of messages of condolence, lots of statements of condemnation about the attacks, some that appear to be solicited, like this morning from the Pakistanis, who seem to be falling all over themselves to condemn terrorism in all its forms, but also some unsolicited ones, like I assume from the Cubans, from the Libyans, from the North Koreans. But of all of the 7 countries on the State Department's state sponsors list, only one of them, I believe, has not condemned this, has not said anything. Does it raise any red flags with you that Saddam Hussein and Iraq have been silent about this?
I'm not surprised. He is one of the leading terrorists in the face of the earth, and I would not expect the slightest drop of the milk of human kindness to be flowing in his veins.
Between Iraq and
Osama bin Laden? No, I would not. I would rather, if I were able to talk about such a matter, I don't think I would do it here.
Senator Powell, you keep talking about this specific list provided to Pakistan. When you talk to them later, when Secretary Armitage talks to them later, or you talk to them, will it be you have to do everything on this list, or you're against us? The United States keeps putting out this with us or against us?
Pakistan is a friendly country. We've had friendly relations with Pakistan for many, many years. Those relations have had ups and downs as a result of various things that have happened over the years. But right now, we have friendly relations with Pakistan. I have spoken to President of Pakistan over the months, and we had a very good conversation just a month or so ago. And so I will approach this.
You're listening to Secretary of State Colin Powell at the State Department in Washington talking about the response from countries all around the world. Just before that, we heard from Attorney General John Ashcroft and FBI Director Robert Mueller talking about where the investigation into the terror attacks this past Tuesday now stands.
That's right. Many, many developments already today. More to come on the investigation itself, Matt, on the rescue and recovery efforts that are happening here in downtown Manhattan and also at the Pentagon. And, of course, the stories of horror continue and some stories of hope.
Yeah, on the good side.
And survivors as well. Of course, our coverage will continue throughout the day. Tom Brokaw is up next. In the meantime, I'm Katie Couric here with Matt Lauer, and we'll see you tomorrow.
This is an NBC News special report. Attack on America. Here is Tom Brokaw.
Good afternoon, everyone. You're looking live at downtown Manhattan, where the rescue and recovery operations continue. And in fact, there is some good news to report. Some firefighters have been pulled from that rubble. They were trapped there on Tuesday morning when the building collapsed. And this evocative picture, reminiscent of Iwo Jima in World War II. 3 firefighters from New York City who've been trying to dig out their fellow firefighters raise the American flag. I'm sorry, I was caught unexpectedly emotional in that moment as I saw that flag, and it did bring back memories of everything that we saw at Iwo Jima. Some firefighters have been rescued today in Lower Manhattan. We have NBC's Ann Curry standing by, and the firefighters union said at the outset that 2 were rescued, but now we have a report that there may be as many as 4. What is the latest?
Well, you know what? Down here, we're not able to actually confirm any rescues of people who were trapped since the buildings went down. However, we can tell you that the scanners are buzzing. We've heard, we can confirm that 2 people have been taken to the hospital. We don't know if these are people who are on the scene attempting to rescue people. Since the buildings went down, we don't know if they're people who were in the buildings when the buildings went down. We don't know anything about their conditions. What we can tell you is that those 2 people are alive, or were alive as they were making their way to the hospital. We can also tell you that just a short time ago, about a half an hour ago, the heavy machinery was ordered to be stopped on one particular part of the construction site because tapping was heard under one of the towers and that rescuers are trying to hear that tapping better. You're probably at this moment, I can't see the footage, but probably at this moment looking at pictures that we got early this morning from the closest you can physically get to the scene of this disaster. You're looking at the scene basically from Church Street as far down as you can go and looking directly at the south building of the World Trade Center disaster. You can probably see or have seen just a short time ago that workers are moving the debris not only with heavy machinery but by hand, also forming a bucket brigade. They are, also separating materials into metal in one bucket and other materials in other buckets. This is clearly not only an effort to find survivors, any survivors here, but also an effort to maintain the integrity of this criminal investigation, which is also going on. We have also seen people here who are looking for family members. Earlier, we talked to a man named Paul DiMartini. He was down here with a flyer. His big brother was on the 88th floor, had an office in the Port Authority. Was last seen on the 78th floor after his wife had escaped. He was helping other people escape. He called his family to tell them that he was okay, and he's not been heard from since. And so his little brother's out here looking for any kind of word. One of the rescuers we spoke to, who has finally left after being here since 1 a.m. on the day of the disaster, he didn't want to go. He said, "I don't want to go because the only way I can deal with this is to do something, to try to do some good." And even though he described the job as being very grisly, very physically demanding and emotionally demanding, he wanted to carry on. Also, just a short time ago, I met up with a big, beefy New York, construction worker in tears, just broken down over what he has seen. Glad that for a time now that the heavy machinery in one particular area has been shut down because he said, it's just too much to take. I need a break, and I don't think I'll ever recover from this, Tom.
Very much NBC's Ann Curry. They now think that they have recovered about 94 bodies altogether from that rubble down there, but the official number that they're using from the city point of view is 4,763 people still reported to be missing in New York City. At the Pentagon, they're estimating about 190 dead so far. And in Pennsylvania, in the crash of United Airlines Flight 93, in which we think that some passengers wrestled the hijackers and forced the plane into the ground before it could hit any critical targets in Washington, D.C. 45 accounted for dead at this time. Earlier today, here is the latest on what is going on overall in this story. President Bush is calling the attacks the first war of the 21st century. War is the operative phrase now. Secretary of State Colin Powell also using that phrase. A Deputy Defense Secretary saying we can expect a sustained military operation. The President will visit New York City on Friday. Tomorrow has been declared a national day of prayer and remembrance, and airlines will be resuming flights today, but only on a limited basis, and you can expect that security will be very tight indeed. Attorney General John Ashcroft said today that they're dispatching employees of the U.S. Marshal Service as well as U.S. Marshals to airports across the country. So if you're planning to fly in the next day or 2 or 3 days and for the foreseeable future, get there early and be patient because you're going to be put through a very rigorous test. Let's hear now what the President had to say earlier today in the Oval Office.
I think about the families, the children. I'm a loving guy, and I'm also someone, however, who's got a job to do. and I intend to do it. And this is a terrible moment. But this country will not relent until we have saved ourselves and others from the terrible tragedy that came upon America.
Thank you. And understandably emotional, President George W. Bush talking first about the children and the families, but also someone who is resolute and determined, and that determination grows with every hour. We heard from Colin Powell just a moment ago as they continue to try to mobilize an international political alliance before they begin military operations against an enemy that they so far are not sharing with us exactly who that may be, if they know at this hour, or where that terrorist cell may be operating out of. Pakistan, which is tucked right up against Afghanistan and widely has been reported to be a training ground for these terrorist cells, was effusive today in its declaration of support for the United States and its condemnation of these attacks. And Pakistan, no doubt, will have a role in any discussions with Afghanistan, where it is also widely believed that Osama bin Laden, the #1 suspect here, is being harbored. Let's go to our Washington Bureau Chief, Tim Russert. Tim, this afternoon, Congress is expected to pass by, I would think, acclamation, the president's request for $20 billion in emergency funding.
Absolutely, Tom. No debate, no discussion of the so-called Social Security Trust Fund. We are in war, and Congress, both parties, are responding.
Tim, what else can we expect from Congress in the next several days? Do you think that there will be some kind of an attempt to have an official declaration of war to go with all this?
Tom, the president can respond militarily to this act of terrorism pretty much any way he wants. But politically, and perhaps even legally, both the White House and the Congress think it better because of the War Powers Act to seek some kind of official approval from the Congress, and that will happen. They're working on the language as we speak. You showed that footage of President Bush in the Oval Office earlier, and it was very, very powerful. One, saying this is the first war of the 21st century, but he also said something else. The focus of this administration is now terrorism. It's almost as if on September 11th, we saw the second Bush administration, the first dealing with taxes and budget and the economy, and now suddenly, a little bit more quickly than he ever thought of, he has embarked on a worldwide crusade against terrorism, and he's looking to lead it. Those who've worked with him over the last few days have said that he does recognize that this is history being played out, that he has now been put into the center of something so much bigger than he had ever imagined or anyone had ever talked about during the campaign of 2000. And thirdly, Colin Powell, who was giving a news conference a little bit earlier, said some very interesting things about Pakistan, which you pointed out a couple seconds ago, Tom. He was asked, what about the sanctions we have against Pakistan because of their nuclear testing? And we have cut back on the aid dramatically. He said, well, those are interesting things to talk about, aren't they? A strong suggestion from the Secretary of State. There are very deep and intense negotiations and discussions going on with Pakistan. Why is that critical? If we wanted to launch a ground campaign, it would be a perfect base. Secondly, we cannot do anything in Afghanistan that in any way would destabilize Pakistan, because Pakistan is a nuclear power, and we could not afford letting nuclear weapons fall in the hands of Islamic fundamentalists.
Tim, it is an international chess match with the stakes could not be higher, obviously, and there are so many pieces on the board at this time, and it's very hard to see where all of this is going to play out. But certainly, this president of the United States, as every president has been in one way or another, is being tested as no one expected that he would be in his first several months in office.
I think about campaigns, presidential campaigns, which we cover ever so closely. And yet what happens when a man takes the oath of office and sits in the Oval Office, takes the oath of office and sits in the Oval Office, what happens to them and how they are in fact tested. You remarked the other day, Tom, about Pearl Harbor, about the Cuban Missile Crisis, about the assassination of John Kennedy, a handful of events that can in any way be compared to this. This is George W. Bush's moment in history. He realizes that.
The old Bob Dylan song, today's the first day of the rest of your life. He will be measured by his ability as commander-in-chief in this first war of the 21st century as he has defined it. Colin Powell, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, Vice President Cheney have been by his side on the phone around the clock. They understand the consequences. We have now drawn the line. They must follow through. If it's Osama bin Laden, then he must be gone after. And in the words of Senator John Kerry, Democrat of Massachusetts, who is in all likelihood running for president, Osama bin Laden must be killed. This is very, very high stakes. This is history before our very eyes.
Thank you very much, NBC's Washington Bureau Chief Tim Russert. Of course, these circumstances take the measure not just of the president and his team, but all the Democrats and other Republicans on Capitol Hill as well. It also takes the measure of all of us because they are a reflection of who we are at this particular time in history. Let's go back down to Lower Manhattan now, and NBC's David Bloom, who does have some additional information on those rescued firefighters. It turns out, I gather, David, that they were not trapped in the original collapse of the building, but during the rescue effort itself.
That's right, Tom. We've seen these buildings collapsing throughout the last 3 days. In fact, some more have come down today, sides of buildings. I'm with Michael Colon, who's one of the volunteer rescue workers here, who was inside working with this debris when this happened. Michael, tell us what you saw.
Well, we've been digging out debris all morning and piece by piece, and within a matter of hours, people were just cheering, clapping, and there were 2 firefighters pulled out from the earlier landslide, and they were they were disorientated, but yet they were walking on their own, and they were filled with emotion, and they were very happy to be alive.
And Michael, these were, just to clarify this, these were not firefighters who were trapped in the original collapse of the World Trade Center.
No, these were the 2 New York City firefighters that were trapped from the earlier landslide, but they may have been under there for over 2 hours.
Now, Michael, I just walked back from that location, and it looked to me like the southeast side of Twin Tower number 2 had come down, and the southwest corner of the Customs building had also come down. How dangerous is the situation right there as far as this ongoing recovery effort? It seemed to me that the recovery operations were a lot less than they had been just a few hours before.
Well, it really hasn't affected the area we were in, and everyone's still digging the whole area, the whole vicinity. Everyone's still digging everything out. I mean, there's tons and tons of people on top of the World Trade Center, and we're still, piece by piece, everything's coming out.
Now, I saw 3 surveyors, structural engineers, who were watching the surrounding buildings to try to sound the alarm if indeed there were more buildings crumbling. But how concerned are you guys doing this rescue work that you might become victims too?
Well, I've been inside certain structural buildings, and I mean, I can only leave it in God's hands, man. If God forbid, there's hundreds of lives right now. Everyone's working, and the thought has occurred to me, but I'm just there doing my job. That's it. You know, and everyone else, man, doing a tremendous job, so.
Michael Colon, volunteer rescue worker, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Tom, I can also tell you from talking with some of the relief workers and emergency workers in there that they have also just recovered 2 other bodies from the original Tuesday attack. These were bodies killed. That has also slowed the rescue work there because they want to make sure that they're properly removed before they go in and start digging again. Tom, back to you.
Thanks very much, David Bloom. His name was Bobby Colon, your volunteer rescue worker.
Michael Colon. Michael Colon.
Michael Colon, a New Yorker's New Yorker, and we have been hearing exactly that phrase from all of those heroic men who are down there. I'm just down here doing my job, and it's God's will if something happens to me as they go back into what is continuing to be a very dangerous situation. One of the leading Republican spokesmen on Capitol Hill is the Nebraska Senator Chuck Hagel, who was on President Bush's short list as a prospective vice presidential candidate. He now joins us. He is a decorated Vietnam veteran, I may also point out. We're hearing today, Senator Hagel, that there could be a sustained military operation once it begins in this war on terrorism. It's clear from the briefings that we're hearing from Secretary Powell and also Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld that they're going to get their political coalition in place. So the American people should be prepared for a long haul here, I gather.
Well, Tom, that's exactly right. We are at war against terrorism, the scourge of our time. This is a long-term effort. This is going to require a coalition of not just the free world, but the civilized world to deal with this. We can't do it alone. We found that out on Tuesday. So we must prepare the right way and bring it together. This is not a business of developing any kind of policy or documentation or effort or objective in a vacuum. It's going to require all the things that the President and the Secretary and the Congress are doing working together right now.
Senator, we have been living for the past several years now in a very happy time in America. We had a booming economy. There was peace abroad in terms of where the United States was, although our flyers were at risk during Kosovo, certainly. And we were living kind of in a time of happy excess. Is all that going to change?
Well, there's no question America is forever changed as a result of what happened in New York and Washington on Tuesday. Now, that doesn't mean we will be forever held captive to terrorism, terrorist threats. We must not be. We're a great free people. But it does mean that consequences that will come from this, security, travel, lifestyle, national security, all the dynamics of our life will have to be adjusted to some extent. And of course, the real question is the balance, the perspective of not giving up individual liberty versus the safety of our institutions and our people.
And Senator, at the same time, although we want to focus on the rescue and recovery efforts in the short term and what we may do militarily in terms of striking back, this country is going to have to think hard about what's going to happen to its economy as well.
Well, Tom, that's right. That's one of the short-term but really long-term consequences of this. For example, we're just finding out today some of the short-term consequences of not having our airline traffic in place over the last 48 hours. Parts coming in from all over, the Federal Express, UPS, all the pieces that we don't think much about that affect the daily lives of everybody are just one tiny piece of this, not even including markets. So, Tom, you're exactly right. This has immense consequences for not just the American economy, but the world economy.
And the climate, I am told by everybody on Capitol Hill, the political climate changed in a heartbeat once those attacks took place, that there was common ground instantly.
Tom, as you know, we're all Americans first. We will always and have always rallied around our president as the symbol of this great country, regardless of what you think of George W. Bush. He is the president. He's the leader of this country. We'll work with him. The Congress has not only a constitutional responsibility to deal with this as well, but also a moral obligation to work with the president on behalf of this country.
Thank you very much. Republican Senator Chuck Hagel of Nebraska, a decorated Vietnam veteran. Let's go to Islamabad now and hear from NBC News correspondent Ron Allen. Ron, the Secretary of State Colin Powell made it very clear that he expects to have a meeting later today with the Pakistani president, and it's pretty plain at this point that the United States is counting on lots of cooperation from Pakistan. What has been the reaction in Pakistan among the people that you're seeing and the television coverage of this terrorist attack?
Well, first, Tom, I can tell you that the Pakistani government is very concerned. They've been going out of their way to say that they have been doing everything they can to combat terrorism over the years, and that they are doing everything they can now to cooperate with the United States. Today at a press conference, a spokesperson for the government said that the government here had not yet received a specific list of requests. So it was very interesting that Secretary of State Powell said that he would be speaking to the government here later today to give them specific things that are requested. Intelligence information, I guess, was certainly one thing. Over across the border in Afghanistan, the reports we're hearing, we can't get to Afghanistan. We have been making requests to get there, but the Taliban government has basically denied Western journalists access to the country. But we're hearing from people who are leaving that there is a growing sense of fear that an attack could be imminent. One clear sign is that the UN has evacuated all of its foreign nationals who have been working in the country, about 80 people or so over the past 48 hours in a very quick evacuation. A number of American families were also in Afghanistan monitoring a trial. You may remember that there are at least 8 foreign aid workers who are on trial in Afghanistan for allegedly preaching Christianity there. And there were some American families who were there trying to monitor the trial. They have left, leaving those 8 workers still in jail. So throughout this region, there is a sense that something could happen very soon. The Taliban officials who we've been able to speak to here in Pakistan have also been saying that they do not believe that Osama bin Laden is behind this attack. Now, of course, that's for the United States government to decide whether they're telling the truth or not. But the Taliban officials, who have a history of not being very public relations conscious, if you will, have been holding briefings, have been making remarks, have been talking to Western journalists, saying, for example, that they claim that they have cut off bin Laden's means of communicating to the outside world, satellite telephones, his access to the internet. They say that they control his movements and that he has not been allowed to see anyone. Now, again, whether the United States believes it or not, we'll soon find out. But the bottom line here is that there's a sense in Pakistan and in Afghanistan across the border that everyone fears that they know that they are in the spotlight. They know that they are perhaps even in the crosshairs. And they are going out of their way to say that they're doing everything. But there's a sense that it's not very convincing, if you will. There was a meeting today between the president of Pakistan and the new U.S. ambassador here. She was at a ceremony, at an event, to present her credentials. Afterwards, she said that the statements that the president is making sound good, that his promises of cooperation sound good, but again, it may not be enough. I think there's a sense here from people that you talk to in the streets that Pakistan has a very serious problem. And I believe over in Afghanistan, mainly, again, based on those evacuations and what those people who are leaving are saying, there's a sense that something could be imminent across the border. Tom?
All right, thank you very much, NBC's Ron Allen. It's also worth pointing out, of course, that Pakistan officially recognizes the Taliban government. It's one of only 3 countries in the world that does that. And there was a report yesterday that at the request of the United States, some military officers from Pakistan had gone to Kabul to begin conversations with the Taliban officials there, telling them that unless...
Good afternoon. I'm Deb McCaskey with some breaking news from here in Tulsa to share with you. At this hour, a United Airlines flight diverted Tuesday to Tulsa from a trip from Atlanta to Los Angeles has now finally been able to resume its original journey. It is the first commercial flight to leave Tulsa since Tuesday's terrible events. The passengers have been stranded here in Green Country along with millions of others around the country. And now we will show you a Great Plains aircraft that just landed from Nashville. And it will be the first commercial flight out of Tulsa as the nation's airlines slowly begin to resume their regular schedule. So slowly but surely we will be able to return to air travel once again. Now, we definitely want to remind you again not to call the airport if you have questions about your flights. The airlines are asking that you call them directly. The airport does not have the flight information. Here are the numbers on your screen. You see them as we continue to scroll through them, but we also want to mention that we do have these posted on our website, teamtulsa.com. So again, call those airlines directly. Now, in other area developments, FBI agents in Fort Smith, Arkansas, just 2 hours from here, continue to detain a man who may have some connection to the attack on America. A Fort Smith newspaper publishing this photo today, believed to be that of Hadi Hassan Amar. Channel 2's Rebecca Siebert, still in Fort Smith. She will continue to remain there. She has attended a news conference with the FBI. The FBI initially picked up the man's wife. She led them to Omar, but so far the FBI and local authorities in Fort Smith not sharing specific information about why the man has been detained or how he might be connected to the bombing. We will check in with Rebecca Siebert later today via satellite. She will continue to stand by in Fort Smith for updates. Couple of very important programming notes to pass along. This just in, NBC's premiere week of the big fall season, scheduled to kick off next week, will not kick off as scheduled. NBC announcing just moments ago that it will be postponed. Other important programming notes to mention: the Race for the Cure special that was supposed to air last night will air tomorrow night, Friday night, from 6:30 to 7. We'll rebroadcast it Sunday from 11 to 11:30 in the morning. Tonight, Friends will air at 7. Just Shoot Me at 7:30. Back-to-back episodes of Will and Grace at 8 and 8:30. Then an NBC News special, Attack on America, from 9 to 10. So this evening, some regular programming resuming. However, the big premiere kickoff for the fall season for NBC will be postponed for next week. Now, an update on weekend football. The NFL has canceled all 15 games for the weekend. the first time ever the NFL has postponed games for non-strike reasons. In fact, games were actually played 2 days after President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in 1963. Back here at home, local high school football games will be played tomorrow night, including the big Jinx Union game. We've not heard about cancellations from outlying Green Country schools at this point. We'll let you know if any of that changes. Regarding the Big Jinx Union matchup tomorrow night, despite the heavy hearts, the two schools will play, as we said, as scheduled, but it is important to note that the Jinx and Union student councils will be accepting cash donations at the ticket gates to benefit the Red Cross in New York. So if you are heading to the big game and would like to help, you can give them cash or a check made to the Red Cross right there as you head into Skelly Stadium. Now we would like to return you to NBC for their continuing coverage of the attack on America.
Why is it will be taken to the air today, Robert?
Yeah, the skies have been open for a little more than 2 hours at this point, but there's not much flying yet. The airlines are taking their time getting this organized and getting up. Most of them say that they may begin some limited flights this evening, and there are few flights this afternoon, mostly just for the purpose of picking up passengers that were stranded at various places. Now, you were talking about that security. There will be increased security, and we've heard a lot about that, increased screening of passengers. Only ticketed passengers will be allowed in boarding areas. And I've wondered about that. Does that mean that if you have an e-ticket reservation, I mean, one of the big attractions of that is you've been able to go right to the boarding area. If you take officials at their word this morning, this would mean they want a piece of paper before you can go through security and get up to the boarding area, so you may have to go to the ticket counter first. Andrew was talking about the U.S. Marshals. There's an attempt to get a uniformed presence into airports, and so you heard the Attorney General a little bit ago saying that they'd use U.S. Marshals and customs agents and Border Patrol in uniform. Idea of putting more people on patrol, that's in the airports. Now, this business of on flights, the idea there, we've had a few U.S. Sky Marshals in the air on international flights only up till now. But the FAA will borrow from the U.S. Army some members of the elite Delta forces. Those are special operations people. Arm them. They'll be disguised, as the Sky Marshals are, disguised as passengers, and they'll be put on a few domestic flights, mostly as a deterrent value.
All right, thank you very much, NBC's Robert Hager. Now we want to go to Chicago. The busiest airport in America is O'Hare, right up there with the field in Atlanta. But in Chicago, where they're just now getting operations underway again, is NBC's Kelly O'Donnell. Kelly?
Good afternoon, Tom. Very slow going here. United Airlines, which is headquartered here in Chicago and also the nation's largest carrier, says it will begin flying only diverted flights late this afternoon. That's their intention now. Resuming scheduled service won't happen until tomorrow morning. So the nation's busiest airport is very slow going right now. Just a short time ago, we tried to get into the terminal area, and we took some pictures there to show you of how it is still very much blocked off. Chicago has used some of its snow front-end loaders that are often deployed when bad weather shuts down O'Hare to block access to the departure gates. We also saw a large Pepsi truck that was here to make deliveries, of course, to the airport, and it was stopped, and a bomb-sniffing dog was used to check out that vehicle. Also, we saw some people who work here at the airport who said they were told to report for duty and then told to turn around, and they were left stranded in the middle of the street. So getting into O'Hare, which is often a place that will have 200,000 people in a single day pass through, has been like getting into an armed camp. Very difficult to do, and of course passengers who are eager to get out of Chicago, who've been staying at the hotels nearby, are not getting anywhere quickly. Most of the people I've talked to today at various airlines say tomorrow morning is when they think things at the earliest can begin to resume normalcy. We haven't seen any takeoffs here, but airport officials are saying that perhaps by late afternoon, this airport, a major hub for most of America, will perhaps begin to see some planes getting back to where they need to be. But so far, slow going here at O'Hare. Tom?
And Kelly, as you know from traveling in and out of O'Hare a lot, a big part of the problem is the vehicular traffic jam that always occurs on the ramps leading up to the departure part of the terminal. I wonder if they're not going to have a lot more public transportation out there as well.
Well, it's been difficult because many people arrive to O'Hare via train system here, and they've been restricted. Only employees who have been able to show their identification have been able to get in. There's talk of not having anyone bring a car up to the departure gates when things really do open up. So there are a lot of questions still to be sorted out, and some of that is based on whether it's the airport's restrictions that they need to follow under the FAA, and then some different things that the individual airlines are doing. So they're asking everyone when flights do resume to allow for much more time, but it has been a time of anticipation and more delays as many passengers are eager to get on, to get home, and to resume this flight schedule. But so far, we have no indications based on what I've been watching the runway since early this morning, and no indications that things are ready to move just yet.
All right, thanks very much. NBC's Kelly O'Donnell at O'Hare, which is very, very slowly opening up its flight operations today. It is the home field of United Airlines, America's largest commercial air carrier. NBC's David Bloom in Lower Manhattan, where they have had some successful rescues today, but these are firefighters that were trapped in the last several hours when those destabilized buildings began to come down around them, David.
That's right, Tom. As we were saying just a few minutes ago, we personally saw 2 buildings. We went in a couple hours ago, shot the buildings, came in within the last half an hour ago, and portions of those buildings were gone. So what we've done is we've spoken to the individual we had on the air a few minutes ago who was talking about the 2 firefighters being rescued. We also just a minute or two ago, and I don't know, Tom, that we've got this tape ready to turn around yet, but what he told us was that he was one of the men actually meticulously picking through the rubble, reached out and touched the firefighter's hand. They found him, he grabbed his hand, they started to pull him out, and that's how one of these 2 firefighters was able to get out of the rubble. Essentially, Tom, a very precarious situation here in Lower Manhattan. Still, we've been saying, of course, all along that their biggest concern was these buildings coming down, and even today, these buildings are still in pieces coming down. Tom?
Thank you very much, NBC's David Bloom. Just to give you an idea of what we're all in for, Mayor Giuliani has said it may take from 30 to 60 days to remove the rubble that has been collected at the base of what was once the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers, each 110 stories high. That's the situation in Lower Manhattan today. We want to catch up on the investigation now. We're going to go to NBC's Pete Williams, who has been in constant contact with his federal law enforcement sources. Pete?
Tom, the Attorney General and the FBI Director today confirming what NBC News reported this morning, that the number of hijackers is believed to be 18. And the FBI Director giving us now a breakdown of who they think at this point, although these numbers could change, but this is the way they think it happened. 5 hijackers on each of the 2 planes that left Boston that were bound from Los Angeles, and 4 hijackers on the other 2 planes, the one that left Newark and the other that left Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C. So a total of 18. They know those hijackers' names. They believe, of course, that they were all bought tickets to get onto the airplanes. Now, that is an important piece of information because it would suggest that all of them passed through airport security to get onto the planes. In other words, that they didn't somehow sneak onto the airplanes from the ground, from the ramp or the tarmac area. All of those names, of course, show up also on the passenger manifest, so that's another reason to believe that they boarded in normal ways, buying their tickets, we're told, with a combination of cash and credit cards, which, of course, also has given the FBI another source of documentary evidence, another trail of evidence that they can follow. The FBI and other law enforcement agencies investigating this case, there seems to be a consensus building that the planning for this attack has probably been going on for about 2 years. Now, as to the key question of who else is out there, this is what a senior government official tells NBC News today, that there is no way to know whether there was, in fact, another attack plan that wasn't carried off. Now, there have been all sorts of reports and speculation that there was a 5th plane because of reports of some kind of altercation between ticket agents at JFK Airport in New York and some stubborn people who were giving them difficulty, and then the Port Authority police had to be called in. That was being looked at as a possible abortive 5th attack because it was a problem that happened about the same time as the other planes took off. Senior officials say they don't believe that incident had anything to do with the terror attacks. However, they can't prove that they have everybody. They can't prove that they got all the hijackers. They cannot prove the negative at this point, that there's nothing else. So the top priority is identifying what they call their associates. They won't give us a number. There have been all sorts of numbers, maybe 40, maybe 50. They're not saying. The Attorney General today simply said the number of associates is significant, Tom.
All right, Pete, let's just see if we can get that into some proper perspective or context. Understandably, they're saying we don't know how many associates there were or at what level they operated. But to be absolutely clear for the American public, they don't have any evidence right now that there are other plans underway somewhere that they know about. Correct. That could be put into effect in the next 12 hours or so.
They know, that's right. I would say two things. Number one, exactly what you said. They know of no other plans that are underway or potential possible other attacks. And also, they don't know of any other attacks that were planned that were somehow foiled or that somehow fell through. But they caution, they don't know what they don't know. And they're trying to round up as many of these associates as possible. But you know, that's a complicated process. You take these 18 names of the hijackers, and then for each hijacker, you run a kind of little tree. Who were they ever seen with? Where did they live? Who was on the list of people they ever talked to on the telephone? Was there anybody ever with them on a credit card transaction? Did they ever write a check to somebody? Did they ever send someone an email? Well, for each hijacker, you generate this long list of names. Then you'll multiply that by 18 hijackers, and you start to get an enormous number of names that the FBI has to try to run down, questioning each one of those associates. That's what's going on right now, and that's why it's such a huge investigation. Probably 8,000 or 9,000 federal agents and support staff right now working in the United States and overseas.
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Pete Williams. You've heard the phrase dragnet in the past. This is one of the largest dragnets in American law enforcement history. It is also reminiscent of the hours immediately after the assassination of John F. Kennedy, when no one believed it could be just a lone gunman by the name of Lee Harvey Oswald. And so there was an enormous dragnet out at that time. That was the death of the President of the United States. Here we're dealing with the deaths of thousands of people in Washington, D.C., and in New York City, and in that hijacked airliner that crashed into a field in Pennsylvania. In New York, one of the most poignant stories, of course, is multiplied thousands of times over. The families who had someone working in the World Trade Center, in the Twin Towers, when they came down, either a family relative or a friend. And there are people wandering the streets now with photographs of their loved ones or their friends, asking if anyone has seen them. Many of them have gone to the Bellevue Hospital Center, and Virginia Shaw is there for us now. Virginia?
Tom, that's absolutely right. There have been so many family members here today, more than yesterday, seeking missing loved ones. I am joined by one of those family members now. This is Carlos Albert, and you are desperately seeking your sister, Aileen?
Yes.
Tell us what you know about what happened on that day.
We spoke to a co-worker of hers who sat directly in front of her that day, and she said she didn't see my sister on the 30th floor at all that day. When they evacuated, they checked 2 or 3 times. Everybody got out safe. I still haven't found out anything about her. I spoke to another co-worker who says she was in the lobby at the time of the explosion. She says she couldn't really give me any information because when that happened, she just went frantic and everyone just ran out of the building. There was glass all over, and we're just still looking.
So you know that some of her co-workers on the same floor where she worked got out safely?
Yes, yes, and I'm hoping, she was also with them at one point or another.
And what have you been doing to try to get information on what's happened to her?
We've checked, her husband's checked all the hospitals. We've checked some in New Jersey. We've checked the websites. We've called the emergency rooms, and we still haven't found out anything. We also called the New York City Missing Persons Hotline, and they still haven't gotten back to us. And we're still trying to get in touch with someone. I also have a cousin who was working at Police Plaza, and he's also trying to get as much information as he can from us to try to find her also.
Can you tell us a little bit about Aileen? Because these are not just numbers that are of missing people. These are real people with stories and families.
Well, she has 2 children. She's married. She's also my son's godmother.
I'm sorry, Carlos. Good luck to you. God bless you. Our prayers are with you, and I hope you get some information soon. Thank you. Carlos Albert is just one of thousands of people who are out there desperately trying to get some word on what has happened to someone in their family, brothers, sisters, husbands, wives, fathers. The activity here at Bellevue Hospital has increased today over yesterday, but again, mostly because of families here trying to find missing loved ones. Also, volunteers coming in to donate blood, donate their services. The numbers here are not great in terms of the patients. They've only treated 250 people so far, most of them released already. And I say only because doctors here thought initially that they would see maybe 1,000 or more people, hoping that they would have that many people to treat and try to save who would be injured. And instead, it has been eerily calm here. The last person that came in here who was pulled from the rubble, a survivor, was yesterday at noon, a 32-year-old woman who was working on the 30th floor. She suffered kidney damage. They say she is doing well, but that she is in no condition to speak. This hospital has had a couple of days to organize. They are holding a prayer service tonight at 6 o'clock. They've set up a crisis center for rescue workers, family members, survivors who are suffering now what they're seeing, and this is not uncommon when there has been a horrible disaster like this, emotional and psychological trauma. And Bellevue is very well known for its psychiatric care, so they are asking people if they need help to come in. They can talk with grief counselors and try to talk about this trauma. A lot of the firefighters who have come in to be treated for minor injuries are going straight back out there, and that seems to be the story today, still waiting and hoping that more survivors will be brought into Bellevue. Tom?
Thank you very much, Virginia Shaw. In fact, there was an emergency call that went out in 2 waves. First, they were asking for physicians who could help out in New York and trained medical personnel. And then as these families, this population of families began to grow, this kind of grieving army wandering the streets of New York looking for their friends or their relatives, then they sent out a word that they needed all the counselors that they could get at Bellevue, at St. Vincent's, and the other hospitals where these family members were showing up. Dateline's Bob McEwen found one of those families, and fair warning, this is a heartbreaking story that you're about to see.
Even for the city that never sleeps, it was an eerie night. As rescue workers sifted through the rubble, this 62-year-old mother wandered the streets, hoping against all hope she could find her son.
Who are you looking for? My son, Thomas Swift.
Frances Swift crossed the Hudson River from New Jersey, looking for her son, Tom. He was in his office at Dean Witter on the 70th floor of Tower 2 when the first plane hit the other tower. Tom picked up the phone to call his mom.
I talked to him at 5 to 9. He was in 2 World Trade Center. He said they were evacuating then. He was leaving then.
Tom had trouble getting through to his wife and asked his mom to let her know he was all right. The news came as a big relief to his sister Kathy. But then, 20 minutes later, the second impact. Kathy, stuck in traffic across the river from the Trade Center, was horrified by what she saw next.
On my way home, I was looking in the side-view mirror of the car, and I seen the building fall. And we were just home all day yesterday, just calling any number that anything was on the TV. And just trying to figure out the time frame of when he called and when the plane hit and when the building fell, and that he should have been out of there.
But then all day yesterday, no word from Tom, the youngest of 5 and the family's pride and joy, according to his brother Patrick.
I'm his older brother, but I looked up to him because, he made something of himself.
Tom Swift was the first in his family to graduate from college, and at age 30 was climbing the corporate ladder. Just 2 weeks ago, the Swifts took their annual vacation together and shot this home video.
Now, how do you plan to go about defending your title next year?
We'll just take it day by day. We'll play it as it comes.
By last evening, his worried mother and brother-in-law had decided to come to Manhattan and check the hospitals one by one.
Beth Israel, the latest they had was 3 o'clock, and he wasn't on their list.
Throughout the night, they struggled to make their way around the deserted city, hoping for the best, but fearing the worst.
Earlier, we felt confident because people said they saw him in front of them on the stairs or with this group getting out of the building. But now we still haven't heard from him, and he would call.
Hospital after hospital checked the latest patient lists for Tom's name.
Is that an updated list?
It wasn't there. Early this morning, Frances Swift headed home, exhausted, but still hopeful, she says. The new day would bring better news.
Do you have a name of someone you're looking for?
Thomas Swift.
Today, Tom's brother and sister continued the search.
I can't imagine other people walking around feeling the way I feel. Lost.
Just keep going back to saying we'll find him.
That's why we're here.
That's why we're here. We're going to find him.
Use anything to sitting at home and just watching it on TV feel so helpless.
We're going to find him.
And this afternoon, for a moment, they thought they had.
Yeah, they might have found him. Dad. I don't know. Mommy said that Peter called the number and that the number, whoever he spoke to, said that they heard from him and that he's okay.
There was information from his company hotline. It seemed he might have somehow called in after the blast. But when the family tried to learn more, there were no solid answers. Details were murky and few. They still don't know how long it might be before they'll find out what happened to Tom.
And we cannot report any good news about Thomas Swift. We have checked as well everywhere, and there is no sign of him anywhere at this time as his family continues the search. That is a story, as I say, that is being multiplied 1,000 times over in the city. Throughout lower Manhattan and on the internet and on cell phone and landline calls as well. We want to go to Florida now, and NBC's Kerry Sanders, who's keeping track of the investigation down there. 2 of the hijackers received pilot training, and Kerry has some additional information for us today on one of them. Kerry?
Well, Tom, it's really people trying to put a picture to who these people are, and photographs now becoming available, and we have a picture of one of the suspected pilots who took over one of the airplanes. You're taking a look at a picture here. Marwan al-Shahid, 23 years old. This picture was secured by WTVJ, the NBC station in Miami. The picture really showing that Marwan al-Shahid, who attended the Venice Flying School in Venice, along with his older cousin, or somebody who he described as his older cousin, Mohammed Atta, who is 33 years old. Now, the folks who got to know them, and they were not very warm people, apparently, by those who are at that flying school. Those who did get to know him said that they were from different countries. Marwan al-Shahid saying that he was from the United Arab Emirates. Mohammed Atta saying that he was from Egypt. They attended the Venice Flying School, as we've told you, for about 7 months, getting their commercial flight rating. There's a lot of attention today now on after they left that school, where did they go? Because they learned to fly propeller planes, sort of a multi-engine plane, and it's a really big step to go from that to getting behind the controls of a 757, 767. So the authorities are looking here, the FBI paying close attention to the flight simulators, several of them in South Florida, talking to the folks there. They received a phone call from one man who says that he does remember both of these people coming to his office, asking them to be trained on a flight simulator for a 727, a different plane, but nonetheless a jet that people fly in, a commercial jet. He spent time with them, each about 3 times, 2 hours each, in the flight simulator for the 727. When he realized the names and saw the faces, he immediately called the FBI. The FBI has spoken to him about what he remembers. The authorities are today in Hollywood, Florida, back at a location where they were yesterday, and they're continuing to take evidence out of an apartment there, a room that was rented in a house, and they've been dusting for fingerprints and other things. They've spent more time at this location, really, than just about any other place. I'm not sure what it is they think they're finding there, but clearly they have more technicians there than anywhere else so far.
Thanks very much, NBC's Kerry Sanders. Kerry, a suggestion. The senior pilot that we had on from Delta Airlines yesterday, retired Neil Soderman, said that if you go to the internet, you can find an awful lot about the 757 and the 767 cockpit. Why don't you take a look at the internet and see what they may have been able to find out from that as well?
You know, what we're also looking at is you can go to the store. In fact, we're talking to a pilot right now, setting it up. You can go to the store, buy a software program, which is a flight simulator, and it has a 757 cockpit on it. You can get it. You can purchase the little steering wheel, the foot pedals, sit down, and you can actually experience what it is, to some extent, what it is to fly a 757. So we've got a commercial airline pilot who's looking at that right now, and we're going to talk to him in a little bit to tell us, if you sat down at this and all you had ever flown was a twin-engine plane, could you learn enough by spending time on this to then take over the controls of a 757?
Thanks very much. Once again, Kerry Sanders, you're well ahead of me. Thanks very much for that fine piece of reporting from Florida. Let's go to NBC's Ann Curry now in Lower Manhattan, get an update on the rescue and recovery operations. And they're now intertwined because some of the rescue workers were in fact trapped and then recovered today. Ann?
That's right. Just today, there was a landslide. Actually, I want to tell you, Tom, there's been a lot of activity, a lot of sirens going, cars rushing. We still haven't pinpointed as to what's causing all of that. But let me tell you that earlier today, well, just a few moments ago, we heard on your program this horrendous story about Tom Swift. And as you pointed out, there are thousands of stories of people not knowing where their loved ones are. Well, the firefighters, that is exactly what is causing these firefighters to put their own lives at risk, to go into these very unstable areas to try to save people. Well, today there was a landslide on one of the areas around the South Tower, and 2 firefighters, we understand, were trapped. Well, earlier today, actually within the last hour and a half, we spoke to a firefighter named Glenn Ray, and he had been digging, and he reached down and felt a hand of someone alive. Let's take a look at the tape I just shot a short time ago.
He scratched my top of my knuckle.
Okay.
So.
And what kind of a feeling was there when this word went out, that you felt that?
When I felt it, when I went down the hill, it was more or less like a sense of, I was so proud, you know. I lost my father to New York City fire in the 23rd Street fire, and I can't even think of the year, but I gave something back. I gave something back today.
In focus from the point of view of those in other parts of the country, not just those of us who live here in New York. And we're going to try to there's been a good deal happen this morning, and those of you who have been with us very recently saw this quite astonishing expression of his company's experiences from Howard Lutnick, who is the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald. And we will undoubtedly see that or portions of that again today. But we've been talking here about the business of the country, and the general consensus, or the consensus, I think, among Ken Aletta, Betsy Stark, and others who joined us here this morning, is that the financial markets now rely very much on the question of American consumer confidence. And we mentioned at one point consumer confidence was, a week ago, at least according to ABC polls, at its lowest level since March of 1977. And we've been discussing the impact, and you at home and everywhere else have been thinking about the impact of this attack on the country, on business consumer confidence as well as life in general. But we wish to, if we may, set the scene or reset the scene of what is happening in a variety of places at the moment. In New York City, not long ago, 3 firemen were pulled alive from the rubble, reinvesting for people, people reinvesting in themselves, the hope that there may be others down there. So we're going to go first to the street, to ABC's Cynthia McFadden.
And
Cynthia?
a firefighter.
Cynthia?
Yep, not a... Peter?
Yes?
Peter, we are standing by here outside St. Vincent's Hospital with great expectation. You have seen this site throughout the day today, Peter, and there were no doctors and nurses on the sidewalk until just about the last half hour. From the time that you began reporting that there were 3 firefighters found buried in the rubble, until now, we have seen a steady stream of doctors and nurses come out of the hospital in anticipation that St. Vincent's will, in fact, be the place that they are brought. We thought that perhaps this ambulance you see here was going to contain them, but it does not, apparently. It was a woman brought inside the hospital. I can tell you a couple of other things here, Peter. Inside the hospital right now is the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Governor Tommy Thompson. He arrived about an hour ago. He went upstairs to visit with some of the people who are patients now at this hospital. He intends to talk to the rest of us in about a half an hour from now. I understand from hospital officials he's actually staying inside to make certain that his speaking to us does not interfere with the arrival of the firefighters. Just a couple of other things. I heard you discussing earlier, Peter, if the president indeed comes to this hospital tomorrow. We know he's coming to New York, and perhaps he will be coming here. How big an entourage he will arrive with? I can tell you that Tommy Thompson arrived with 8 unmarked cars today and 2 police motorcycles as well as another police van. And in terms of the firefighters themselves, we have an as yet unconfirmed report that the 3 firefighters who have been rescued from the rubble were in a van under a bridge when the building collapsed. Again, that's unconfirmed, but those are from fellow rescue workers who have told ABC News that that is the reason that perhaps they were able to be rescued. We hear sirens all around us, and we hear one coming down right now. Yeah. What the hospital official is reporting behind me is what we suspected. This ambulance here is not related, in fact, to the rescue. Peter, back to you. We'll let you know when they get here.
Yeah, Cynthia, I just want to ask you one more question. What was the effect on people's morale when they heard that the firefighters had been rescued?
Oh, Peter, I mean, hard for me to describe. I mean, these doctors, these nurses have been extraordinarily depressed that they haven't been able to use their enormous skill and talent to actually do some good. They have been enormously frustrated that now we're going into hour 37 since they have received a patient here, someone that they could actually help. So they were enormously elated. I can also tell you, Peter, that we've taken a little walk around the immediate vicinity here in Greenwich Village. We are on 7th Avenue and 11th Street, and everywhere you go, plastered all over the walls, are pictures of people who are missing. Having covered Princess Diana's funeral and the bouquets of flowers that were everywhere all over London, these flyers may perhaps be remembered, remember this tragedy that way. They are plastered everywhere. Back to you, Peter.
Thanks very much, Cynthia. And your mention of Diana, the former Princess of Wales, leads me to say that in London today, where they change the guard every day at Buckingham Palace, the Coldstream Guards, the band of the Coldstream Guards, part of Her Majesty's household regiments, played the Star-Spangled Banner, while hundreds of Americans outside the palace gates wept, waved U.S. flags, and sang the words to the national anthem. That's outside Buckingham Palace in London today. It was Queen Elizabeth herself who has a long and very deep relationship with the United States, both in personal terms with numerous leaders and, of course, as a country, ordered the special ceremony as a sign of solidarity with the American people suffering, as we all know, from the worst terrorist strike ever. And there were thousands of people there today. The U.S. Embassy in London is in a square called Grosvenor Square. And outside the embassy, there has been, as we have seen here in New York City and elsewhere in this country, large numbers of flowers being laid. The embassies had to add extra consolation books to those they normally have so that people can write messages of sympathy and condolences to American families who have lost loved ones. But at some point today, we do indeed want to see and hear the Coldstream Guards playing the national anthem outside Buckingham Palace, and I have no doubt that our news desk will be looking for that already. Now, John Miller is with us. John Miller, can you bring us any more information on this issue with the firemen?
Yeah, and there's a lot of confusion down there, which is why many different versions of the stories are coming out. But as we can sort through this, there's 2 or 3 different things happening right now. Number one, there's been a shift in the rubble, not as much as a secondary collapse, but certainly something that's kicked up a lot of dust and a new plume of black smoke. They have pulled all rescue workers out of the area of West and Liberty Street, which would be the southwest corner of what had been the Trade Center complex. There were several injuries there. We are told all minor injuries, just cuts and bruises. They are being transported to area hospitals, including a group that's been put on a tugboat towards New Jersey, where they still have a triage staging area. Number two, 2 firemen that were involved in the rescue effort fell into a void while they were looking for their colleagues and other victims. Their fire company was then pulled out for their own safety. Then another rescue company was sent in, and they worked for 2 hours to free those 2 firemen. So those firemen were freed from the rubble, but they were not part of the original collapse more than 48 hours ago. Number three, there are rescue workers opposite the firehouse on Liberty Street towards the center of the rubble who are working now still to free 4 firefighters. So there's many operations going on there at once. All of these reports are coming out at once, and that's what's generating the confusion between city officials, between medical officials, and between our people.
Okay, and of course we're passing it on sometimes, but not often, I hope incorrectly. Just to clarify, John, when I said a while ago that 3 firemen had been rescued, in fact it was 2, and it was 2 firemen not who'd been trapped in the original disaster, but who'd fallen into a hole while they were looking for their colleagues. Am I correct?
Right. But at this moment, the thing that you and I were talking about a short time ago, the sound of tapping from that location, they have apparently found 4 firemen, but they are not pulled out yet. They're still working on that.
Can you be more precise by what people mean about a shift in the rubble?
I spoke to someone who was there who said, I don't know what happened. Suddenly there was smoke everywhere. I had to pick myself up. My hand is injured. He's going to the hospital. There was an alarm that sounded, a 3-2 on a horn down there, which is a signal to pull out. And then the word from people on the scene there was to evacuate that area because there had not been a secondary collapse, meaning not another building had fallen, but there had been a shift in the rubble, which meant part of the collapse that was already there had fallen over and kicked up some new dust and smoke. So we don't know what caused that.
Okay, John, thanks very much. John Miller, keeping us abreast as best we can of the reality of what is really happening on scene in the lower end of Manhattan today. It does remind me again to tell you, and I think you already know this, that one of the emergency room doctors, Dr. Andrew Feldman, I think it was, came to see us yesterday, who had been working in the rubble precisely at Ground Zero. And I said, what's it like compared to what we see on television? And he just answered the question I think we all know, that we see on television a very different view than reality. It's one of the complaints that military commanders sometimes make, is that war is seen in a different way than it really is when it's seen on television, and therefore affects people's perceptions. But there's no doubt none of us have had any difficulty, whether we have been to the site, as many of us have, or not been to the site, as so much of the country has been having some deep connection to what is happening here and at the Pentagon. It has been a very busy morning in Washington. The President has had a very public phone call with the political leadership in New York. The Secretary of State has been talking to the press about the relationship to the international community and the search for the terrorists. The Attorney General and the Director of the FBI have all spoken, as has the Secretary of Transportation, about opening airspace across America. And so let's go to Washington and Claire Shipman and see how best we can get caught up. Claire.
Well, Peter, it has been a busy day here in Washington, and we've seen an emotional president today, both right after the very public phone call you mentioned in which he talked to the mayor and governor of New York. He talked about the sense of grief that everybody's feeling, and you could see on his face just how moved he was. He also made a trip to a local hospital, the Washington Hospital Center, to see injured Pentagon workers. Again, something he's been talking to his staff about wanting to do. In fact, he's declared tomorrow a national day of prayer and mourning, and the president is going to make 2 very public appearances in churches, one here at the National Cathedral in Washington at noon, where he'll participate in a prayer service, and then tomorrow, as you know, he's coming to New York. He's going to attend a memorial service at St. Patrick's Cathedral, and then try to figure out some way where he can see the site there without getting in the way of those rescue efforts, because they're very concerned about that. In terms of congressional news, Congress is on the verge of passing a large anti-terrorism package that the president asked for, $20 billion to help fight terrorism and deal with this disaster that the country has on its hands. And Congress is also on the verge of passing essentially some support for the president to use force, a broad authority to use force, which is what the White House was hoping for. We've also learned, Peter, that security detail in Washington is considering some new security measures around the White House. They're thinking about closing a few more streets that surround the White House. We're not sure which ones yet, but we're told that we should know by the end of the day if they're going to move ahead and do that.
Okay, thanks, Claire, very much. Just trying to get people very quickly caught up on some of the other things that developed in Washington. John Ashcroft, the Attorney General, who's not going to talk about the investigation in very much detail, said the government was moving as quickly as it could to help the families of those public officials or public employees who were involved. By that he meant the firefighters and the police and other relief workers who work for various levels of government. And so they're trying to make money available and support available, really, as he said, as a gesture of gratitude to people who have lost their lives in the service of the country. He went on at some length about additional security at the airport, said there was going to be hundreds of marshals deployed in order to create a larger police presence at the airports in the country. He did say at one point, as have numerous other public officials, that there had been concern in government about any threats to Arabs and South Asians in the country, or Americans of Arab and South Asian descent, he put it that way. And he said, as every other public official has said, we as Americans must be at our best. I think we all know what he means by that. He said that as far as the overseas investigation was concerned, that legal attaches at the embassies in many parts of the world are getting lots of local cooperation, that the lead hotline for the FBI had had 2,055 calls. There had been 22,000 suggestions for leads on the government FBI website, but he said they were basically just dealing with thousands and thousands of leads. In terms of the black boxes from the 4 aircraft that went down, he did point out the obvious in some respects, that the ones in New York are going to be most difficult to retrieve if they are ever retrieved. But he did say that the black box from the crash of the United Flight 93 in Pennsylvania was probably the most feasible. And that is, even though the plane is in pieces over a very, very large area at the moment, he thought, and when I say large area, I mean over 6 miles. We'll try to understand that in a little while. But it is the least complicated disaster site, now a crime site, of the 4 aircraft that went down. In terms of the hijackers, he said they now believe there were 18 of them on the 4 aircraft. 2 aircraft, the American Airlines out and the United Airlines out of Boston, had 5 on them each, and that the one that crashed in Pennsylvania and American Flight 77, which of course crashed into the Pentagon, each had 4 on them. He wasn't prepared to identify any of the people who they are looking at in the country, but if you've been listening to the television or to the radio, you will see that there have been a number. There's a group of people out there at the moment, maybe 49 or 50 of them, I think is the latest figure, in which federal authorities are very interested. And then Robert Mueller, the director of the FBI, said they were looking for people who were out of status, by which he meant there's a series of Immigration Naturalization Service regulations, and they're looking for people who they have in their system who may be out of status, so they can at the very least talk to them, but they have not yet made any arrests. He would make any other comment on any other operations. It was the Attorney General, I think, or the Director of the FBI, forgotten, who said that indeed they could confirm that some of those involved in these terrorist acts had flight training. Yes, they had the capacity to operate planes, and it was substantial. They were, in all respects, technically proficient. No comment whatsoever on this whole issue of the White House as an argument, as a target, and no comment whatsoever on any of the ongoing operations of the Justice Department. But let me go at that particular point to ABC's Pierre Thomas, who's in Washington. Pierre, have I got the investigation right? And if I haven't, please correct me and add to it.
Peter, you're exactly on the money. One major point today, however, the 18 hijackers. We now have information from our sources that they have identified all 18 hijackers. They actually have photographs, and we may be getting those photographs and their names in the next couple of days, maybe as early as today, Peter. So that is a very significant thing in terms of their investigation, knowing who these people are, and they're moving out in concentric circles from that particular group.
Pierre, I wonder if you know any more about the investigation of the crash site in Pennsylvania, do you?
Well, the only thing my sources are telling me there is that, again, the black box is so critical because that will augment what they heard from the cell phone calls. It will give them more information about how these attacks were first launched.
And the Attorney General has said he is not prepared. Everybody's being asked about Osama bin Laden. He said he was not prepared to identify anybody who had ultimate responsibility for that. And is that precisely the company tone, the company rule at the moment in terms of talking to the public?
Peter, it is the company tone, but I can tell you I've talked to a number of very senior officials in government, and they say Osama bin Laden is prime suspect, that a number of these suspects had connections to him, and they're pursuing them, but they want to be clear on all the details before they make that final announcement, because after that, action will be coming very, very quickly.
Okay, thanks very much. Now let us move to the international dimension of this, because this is a crisis, which many people call a war, certainly a crisis, which has any number of international dimensions. The Secretary of State, Colin Powell, held a briefing today, said a couple of things that were simply interesting, including the fact that of all the 7 countries which are on the U.S. list of those countries which sponsor, those states which sponsor terrorism, only Iraq had not extended its sympathies or whatever to the United States. Syria, Iraq, Libya, Iran, Afghanistan, North Korea, and Sudan, all are on that list, and only Iraq, not to the Secretary's surprise, he said, has not said anything to the United States. They're looking at a terrorist organization which has the capacity to have done this. There is a list of candidates. We're pretty certain that Osama bin Laden is currently in Afghanistan. Whether he's under arrest or not, we do not know. The Secretary has said any number of times that one of the key issues is Pakistan. The new American ambassador to Pakistan, Wendy Chamberlain, has been in to see General Musharraf, and Secretary Powell is going to talk to him this afternoon. I think at this point we want to bring in Martha Raddatz, who is our correspondent at the State Department and who was at that briefing. The first headline, I think, Martha, am I correct here, is that retaliation, for which so many people in the country hunger almost, is going to be months away.
Well, Secretary Powell did not say that on the record today. I have talked to several people who say that things should calm down in the language of retaliation. Indeed, they are looking at suspects. And in fact, Secretary Powell did say on the record today that one of those suspects is bin Laden, and he's the first cabinet member, first senior official to say that on the record. But they are saying that any sort of military retaliation will take time, even if they determine who did this, who was behind it. It is something that could take months. They're very nervous about hitting the right targets and hitting a target that will matter. They also want to rally world opinion, and if the United States went in quickly, hit the wrong targets, had a lot of civilian casualties, then they would lose world opinion.
Martha, I'm sure you ask people in the State Department this, or remind them, as if they need to be reminded, that there are a great many people in the country who feel an urgent need to retaliate against somebody. So what's the department say about that?
Well, indeed, there is that urgency. There's a lot of that feeling at the Pentagon. There's a lot of that feeling in the State Department. But they really want to be cautious about this. They do say if something happens, it will not be pinprick strikes. They said in the United States in the last 5 or 6 years, you've seen pinprick strikes. You know how the campaign in Bosnia started. It was just pinprick strikes. They said this will be a measured response. We want to make a difference. And also the senior official I spoke to said this sort of campaign could go on for months and months.
Now, every country in the world has a desk officer, an American who works on that country's desk at the State Department today. Put aside America's friends for a moment. What are you getting from those desk officers about those people in the country who can genuinely be regarded as America's enemies and allies?
Well, it's funny you should use the word friends, Peter, because that's the word Colin Powell used today to describe Pakistan. And in fact, he has already just a short time ago, he has talked to General Musharraf about what Pakistan is expected to do here. He will not, again, say that on the record. I've talked to some senior officials, desk officers as well, about what he said to Pakistan. And basically what they're demanding is that Pakistan provide airspace in case there is some sort of military response, that they close the borders to Afghanistan, that they stop sending fuel to the Taliban. As far as enemies, you heard Secretary Powell today talk about Saddam Hussein. He certainly wouldn't say whether he thought he had anything to do with it, whether Saddam Hussein had anything to do with these attacks, but he did say he doesn't expect any kind words from his kind. They are getting some sense of support. You've heard the world condemn the violence, but they really want action. They really want formal answers, and they have not gotten formal answers, including from Pakistan.
Okay. Thanks very much, Martha Raddatz at the State Department. Many Americans have had a hard time. I'm just trying to think precisely how to begin this. Many Americans have had a very difficult time understanding. Let's put it this way. I think all of us have had a hard time understanding those characters, those terrorists, those people who are so indifferent to human life that they would take the lives of innocent civilians into their hands on 4 aircraft and then take the lives of so many other Americans by crashing them into 2 buildings and the Pentagon and into rural Pennsylvania. But what we want to try to do in the next period of time is to try to understand in a little broader terms why people out there feel so strongly about the United States. In some cases, why do they hate the United States? And we've asked 3 people to come and join us who we all think can make a contribution to our understanding about this. And I think it'll be a very interesting discussion. I beg your pardon, 4 people, of course. In no particular order, I want to introduce first in our Washington bureau, Hisham Melhem, who is the Washington reporter for As-Safir, which is a Lebanese newspaper. Mr. Melhem, thank you very much for joining us. In Washington as well, David Makovsky, who is at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy and a former editor of the Jerusalem Post, which is an English language newspaper in Jerusalem. On the telephone from Ramallah in the Palestinian territory. Oh, she's on television. That's wonderful. Well, then you have to tell me where she is. She's Hanan Ashrawi. It's important where she is. Hello, Hanan. Hanan Ashrawi is
hello, Peter.
Widely known in the United States and is a spokesperson for the Arab League. She is, of course, a Palestinian. Where precisely are you, Hanan?
I'm in Ramallah, Peter.
Oh, you're in Ramallah.
She's
in Ramallah, which is her hometown on the West Bank.
Yes.
And finally, in our Washington bureau, Judith Kipper, our longtime analyst of affairs both East-West and Middle East. And Hanan, you know America very well. You went to school here, as I recall. You're a scholar from the University of Virginia. Your children have gone to school here as well. I don't know many people in the Arab world, certainly among Palestinians, who know the United States any better. Those people who attacked the United States yesterday, why do they hate us? That's the question everybody's asking.
Well, it's very hard to forecast and to conjecture on motives, but certainly the whole issue of the legacy of the Cold War is still with us. And I think in many cases there are a combination of factors. U.S. foreign policy, a sense of power and unbridled power. If by any chance Osama bin Laden or any of the other groups are involved in that, it would mean that the U.S. Itself had contributed to the formation of these groups in the days of the Cold War, when it trained people like that. The CIA funded them, trained them, gave them weapons in its fight against communism. And also during the days in which the U.S., for example, fought Arab nationalism, and instead of using it as a cohesive force and viewing it as a source of stability, it fought it and supported all sorts of extremist groups in order to undermine that and, as they said, to fight communism. There are other factors, a sense of extreme victimization, a sense of exclusion. There could be also factors of fundamentalism and zealotry. These exist in all religions, and I would caution against attributing it only to one religion. We in Palestine feel the impact of fundamentalism from 3 religions, not just one. Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And any person or group that feels that God gave it a divine right and a superior status over others, certainly is going to go to extreme measures, and they would have disregard for human lives if they believe in the so-called absolute justice of their cause. But there are also other factors involved.
I'll ask you to come back to factors. Let us involve some other people first. Let me go to Washington and ask David Makovsky the same question, former editor for the Jerusalem Post. It's the question on people's minds, Mr. Makovsky. Why do they, whomever they may be, hate us?
Well, I guess that's really, Peter, the real question. Who is they? I mean, if bin Laden is the leading suspect, then we have to be very careful until we know if that is the case. I think we have to listen to what he says. And what he's talking about is a sense of rejection of Western civilization. He sees in the U.S. going in the Middle East or out in the world as blocking somehow the ascendance of Islam. I think he has a very distorted view of Islam and uses that to purvey hate. So I think his grief is with Western civilization. He says it, and I think we should listen to what he says.
You said, and other people believe, that the United States, or the West, the material West in some respects, is blocking the ascendance of Islam. What do you mean?
Well, from what he says so long as the U.S. is in the Gulf, and the U.S. has a presence there, that he will fight to liberate it from Muslim lands. And I mean, the fact that the U.S. 3 times has used force in the last 10 years, it's interesting. It's always been on behalf of a Muslim state, for the Albanian Muslims, for the Muslims in Bosnia, for Kuwait, which was a vanquished Arab state, although it was fighting another Arab state. But 3 times the U.S. has used its military, and it's been on behalf of Muslims. And yet, he has a beef with the U.S.
Let me go to Hisham Melhem, who's in Washington, the reporter for As-Safir, which is the daily newspaper. First of all, am I pronouncing your name both correctly?
Hisham Melhem. Yes.
Melhem, that's what I said. And it is, of course, As-Safir.
Right.
Try to answer the same question. I mean, no country in the Middle East has been so tortured, perhaps other than the Palestinian and Israeli conflict, has been tortured by Islam, capitalism, communism, Christianity, Islam, as has Lebanon. So you should understand. Who out there hates the United States and why?
Well, there are many people in the region who have deep feelings of resentment against the United States policy in the region. I mean, beyond the obvious reasons of the United States being the only empire in the world today with an incredible reach, incredible cultural, political, economic influence that affects the daily lives of the region, including people in Lebanon and throughout the Arab world. But I think if we're talking about Osama bin Laden, we're talking about zealots. Religious zealots are absolutists, whether they are Christians or Jews or Muslims, and they believe that they have the right, a divine right, to impose their will on other people. Osama bin Laden, if he is the culprit here, is waging a war not only against the West, a crusade against the West, he's waging a war against his own people because he has a malignant, malign, distorted view of Islam that he would like to impose on the rest of the region. And although it is ironic that these views of the West did not bother him a lot when he was in collaboration with Western powers, when they were fighting together the communists in Afghanistan. I think bin Laden is exploiting the deep sense of grief, resentment, anger in the Arab world because of certain U.S. policies towards Israel, towards Iraq, and he's taking that into extreme. But I think we should put this whole thing in context. Obviously, American-Arab relationships are complex, multifaceted. If you look, and when Arabs look at the United States, they see different Americas. They see, if you ask the Kuwaitis and the Saudis, they see the United States as the savior and the protector. If you ask the Iraqis, many of them, they will tell you it's the tormentor. If you ask many Palestinians, they will tell you it's the facilitator of Israel's continued occupation. And beyond that, there are many Arabs who also lament the fact that the United States doesn't speak strongly against the abuse of human rights in those Arab states that are close to the United States. But I would add, Peter, quickly that this is a recent phenomenon. For more than a century, there was a huge reservoir of goodwill towards the United States and the Arab world because it was the only major Western power without colonial legacy in the region, and because of the immense contributions of American educational institutions in the region, such as the AUB, and you know it very well, American University in Beirut, American University in Cairo. But this began to change with the establishment of Israel and Palestine, and particularly after the '67 war, when for most Arabs, the United States became the protector of Israel, and the United States, embraced Israel very tight.
Mr. Melhem, I apologize for interrupting you, and you're very eloquent on the subject. I want to, if I may, just hold the Israeli-American-Palestinian question for just a second, because there is a tendency, and let me ask you this first and then go to Judith Kipper, our analyst in Washington. There is a tendency in the United States and in other countries as well to believe that despite what Hanan Ashrawi said and you, that there is something about Islam that breeds this kind of terror. What do you think?
Look, I'm a secularist. I'm not a Muslim, although I believe that Islam is part of my cultural heritage. There are many zealots in every religion. The historic encounter, I know this is not the place to talk about history, maybe. The historical encounter between Islam and the West was very complex, multifaceted. We've seen armies from the West coming to the Middle East, from the Middle East going to the West. The Mediterranean was a great bridge for exchanging goods and ideas and people. It was also a bridge for warfare. So we have that legacy. Only the Western Muslim powers threatened the West at one time. And in modern times, many Muslim countries, many Arab countries were under the yoke of Western colonialism. With all the ramifications of such a control. So yes, we have a legacy.
We cannot escape history, I think, is the
absolutely,
point you're making.
absolutely.
Okay.
That's the problem, and we are in many ways we are still hostage to the suffering that kind of complex history brought about. But we are not condemned to fight a civilizational war, as some people allege in the United States, as some people like Osama bin Laden allege on the other side.
Okay. Now let me ask Judith Kipper a question, and I apologize for interrupting you. I just want to make everybody gets a fair crack at this. Judith Kipper has got a long experience in the Middle East. We've been very careful, Judith, talking to the audience and saying that we're not sure this is Osama bin Laden, and until the United States points its finger directly and finds Osama bin Laden responsible, we have to be just that careful. But if it were not Osama bin Laden, specifically, the people who did this to the United States and others who applauded it, are they the same kind of people?
I think they are, Peter, and I think the legacy of petrodollars after the 1973 Arab-Israeli War, when enormous wealth came into the area without work and produced a lot of infrastructure, but none of the Arab regimes really took a lesson from it to produce decent education or participation or democratization or even economic opportunities. And today you have 70% of the population of the Middle East that were born since petrodollars. They're under the age of 25. So this 70% is extremely frustrated. They witnessed the Iranian Revolution, the Iran-Iraq War, the Oslo peace process, 2 intifadas, and a number of other events that perhaps I am missing. So you have people, young men without direction, terribly frustrated, not very well educated, have no stake in the systems in which they live, very angry, and the object of their anger tends to be the United States, because it's very, very difficult for them to demonstrate or to show publicly any anger against their own regimes, because it's simply not tolerated.
There is no truly democratic regime anywhere in the Middle East. It can be argued in many cases with the exception of Israel, correct?
I would say that there are processes of democratization in a few countries, but no democracy. Ironically, the country that has a process of change by a major process of democratization is Iran. And of course, the United States and Iran are not speaking, and we have a unilateral embargo on Iran, and we're not engaging with Iran to try to influence the outcome of that process in a positive way. And this is also a huge legacy, not only of petrodollars, the youth explosion, the slow economic growth, but of the, every action has a reaction. And after Afghanistan, there were a lot of young men roaming around who had nothing to do.
And all they know how to do is fight guerrilla wars, and we see it now.
You're talking about after the struggle in Afghanistan to get rid of the Soviets, in which the United States and Osama bin Laden were actually in many respects on the same side. And in some, are you arguing, let me turn to Hanan Ashrawi and ask her this question, because many of these young men come from the Arab world. Hanan, do you think that the West is just simply reaping, in some respects, the crop that it helped to sow in Afghanistan?
Yes, I certainly think so. And while I agree with much of what Judith has said, but I certainly don't agree that the U.S. is the unwitting target of the young people's frustrations with their own situation, disenfranchisement, and the status of their regimes. No, I think that the U.S. has had a very direct role in the politics and the realities of the region. I think it has helped shape attitudes directly. As I said, many of the mistakes of U.S. foreign policy during the Cold War as well, and the fact that it harbored and encouraged extremism and fundamentalism as a means of trying to fragment the Arab world. And of course, since the creation of the State of Israel, and particularly since '67, as Hisham Milham had said, all this goodwill that the Arab world had for the U.S., it squandered by its blind support for Israel. I can give you a few examples. Palestinians are being shelled and killed. Individuals are being assassinated by rockets, by missiles fired from Apache helicopters, gunships, fired from F-16s. They all have "Made in the USA" on them. And so, in a sense, there is a direct, I'm using this only as an example, a direct intervention. So the Palestinians feel that the U.S. is not just a peace broker or a sponsor or whatever. They feel that it is taking an active role, an active part in their daily realities. And at the same time, they're trying to make a distinction.
Can I stop you for just 1 second? I apologize, because I think it's important in broad terms for Americans to understand or to know whether or not the current conflict, the current enduring conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis, which is at an extraordinary level of intensity at the moment, constant Israeli attacks against the Palestinian territories, Palestinian, in many cases, terrorist bombers going into Israel. Is that a contributing factor to the global terrorism and what we're seeing here in the United States?
I would say that's a contributing factor to instability, distrust, hostility, and a sense of victimization. The unbridled use of power, unchecked. The fact that Israel is given preferential treatment, treated as a country above the law, all its sins forgiven, even ahead of time, a priori, while the Palestinians are totally deprived of the protection of the law and are constantly even blamed, even though they are under occupation, being killed, starved. I mean, the Palestinians now, for the first time, I see genuine hunger. Totally fragmented.
And the Palestinians is the point you're making the Palestinians hold the United States as accountable for that as they do Israel?
I think there's a serious paradox here. I think it's a dilemma. The Palestinians are desperately reaching out to the Americans, and you hear that all the time. First of all, believing that the American people have a sense of fair play, and they don't understand why the American people are maligning them. But two, they're reaching out to the American administration and saying, you launched this peace process, we trusted you. We sort of cast our faith with you, and then you betrayed us, in the sense that you allowed all these things to happen without intervention. You continue with this support and cover for Israel.
David McCoskey.
So there is this double attitude, I think, between the Palestinians and the Americans. But I don't want to oversimplify the issues. I think so long as the Palestinians are being treated this way, and the whole Arab world now with the information revolution and Arab satellite stations, the whole Arab world is watching daily bodies being charred, shelled, destroyed, homes being shelled and destroyed, trees uprooted. This feeling has become part of a collective grievance.
I recognize that I am in danger here of generalizing about one of the world's most complicated subjects, but I do want to, for which I apologize to all of you, because you could talk about this and have talked about this for years. David McCoskey from the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. How does the United States, in your view, go forward under the current circumstances? The United States has been attacked by people. What does it do?
Well, I think we need to understand, first of all, and to follow up on some of the things being said before me, there's frustration here on all sides. The Israelis are also frustrated with being the victims of suicide bombing. The issue, Peter, I think, is what are governments doing about it? What sort of tone are they setting? Let's give an example of this morning in the United States. President Bush, before him, Mayor Giuliani, set an important tone by saying to the American street that we cannot tolerate any anti-Muslim sentiment. I was very proud that they did that. That was the right tone of leadership.
Isn't it interesting, though, that they feel compelled to say so?
Yeah, they do feel compelled to say so, but it's important that they're doing it. Unfortunately, what I think is the question is what sort of tone is being set elsewhere. Ms. Ashrawi talks about Palestinian sentiment. The very morning of the World Trade Center bombings in the official state organ of the Palestinian Authority, these are not Hamas radicals. It says that suicide bombing are the noble successors of the people who blew up the Marines, and it said that these are the most noble people on earth. This is what the Palestinian Authority state organ is saying. The question is the tone. And I think if you say, what can the U.S. do? Of course, there's the military side, and there's a lot of different dimensions of this. But one of the most important things, in my mind, I feel very strongly about this, is to get leaders across the world, and that includes in the Arab world, but not exclusively so. And I want to be clear about that, not exclusively so, on all sides, to say religion does not condone suicide bombings, and that is illegitimate. And if we don't root out this sort of idea that religious leaders can get on television, state television, and call for the killing of Americans, which is what's going on in the Palestinian Authority and elsewhere, if they don't set that tone, then what do we expect? And I think Judith is 100% right about the economic failures and all that. The point is that the leaders find it easy to deflect attention from their own failures in terms of their own economies. What they could do constructively, if you say tomorrow morning what should be done, what should be done is very simple. Ask every religious leader to get up and to say that suicide bombing is against religion. Have a world conference of leaders, of religious leaders across the world, get up and say any leader who says that suicide bombing is legitimate is outside the pale.
Okay, I apologize for interrupting you two. I just want to ask Mr. Hisham Milham, a colleague reporter in Beirut, in summary, to give us the last word here, because Americans just cannot understand why many Arab leaders don't stand up in front of their own people and say this has been a horrible act or other acts are horrible acts. And is it in part because there is such a disconnect between government and the street in the Arab world?
Well, to begin with, I'm not known for being very nice to Arab leaders, but at least we have to say that most of them, if not all of them, condemned in the strongest terms.
You make a very good point.
What occurred? I mean, the tragedy and the inferno that we saw in New York, and I think they were genuine, and some of them actually, and again, I don't want to defend them. Some of them, like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and others, were subjected to this kind of incredible terror against them from the likes and from the soulmates of Osama bin Laden, if not from Osama bin Laden himself. Now, about the disconnect between the Arab leaders and their own street, the disconnect between the Arab leaders and some of the world opinion, yes, of course it exists. Most of these rulers are autocratic rulers. They were not elected. They are not accountable for the opinion, public opinion in their own country, although we have to admit that even though we are dealing with non-democratic regimes on the whole, there is such a thing called public opinion in the Arab world, and we can measure it in so many ways, including opinion poll, but there are other ways also to measure it. And some of them are aware today that there is a great deal of resentment and anger and frustration in the Arab street because of the ongoing tragedy in Palestine, because the United States appears to them as the protector of Israeli conquest of the Arabs. I mean, the Arabs will understand an American commitment to the survival of Israel, but they cannot understand and they cannot tolerate America's support, or it seems the American support for Israel's conquest or continued conquest of the Palestinians. There is also the frustration over the tragedy of Iraq, although not only the sanctions are responsible for it, the regime, the brutal regime of Saddam Hussein is also responsible for it, but many people sometimes probably find it easier to lump it on and to blame the Americans. Again, this is the empire. I mean, the American reach in the Arab world, Peter, is incredible. It's cultural, it's political, it's economic, it's strategic. It affects the daily life of every Arab. And that's something sometimes the average American cannot understand.
Please.
The incredible heavy weight of the American influence in the region, and sometimes the Americans do not use that influence for good deeds, for the welfare of the people there. And that's why I mentioned in passing the issue of human rights in the Arab world, where we see a great deal of violations there.
Okay, I apologize. To have four people who know this so well, and to realize that this is what they have discussed throughout their lives, and to have to cut them off, not a good idea. But I want to thank them all. Hisham Melhem, the reporter for As-Safir, who is based in Washington, Hanan Ashrawi, who is the spokesperson for the Arab League. And it's interesting, on the television from Ramallah tonight, in the Palestinian territories, a city that is very often cut off under the current circumstances. Hanan, thank you very much for giving us the time. David Makovsky at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy in Washington, and our own Judith Kipper, ABC's analyst Judith Kipper. And we're going to keep you around, Judith, to help us interpret, not interpret, but to restate some of the opinions that we've heard so eloquently today. Thank you all very much. Let us continue with our coverage by turning it over for just a couple of minutes to Charlie Gibson. Charlie, find out what you've discovered in the last bit.
Well, Peter, I want to talk to you a little bit about the mood down at the rescue site at the World Trade Center, the former World Trade Center site, really, I guess is the only way to refer to it. The rescue workers, and there are thousands of them, were going in and out in shifts during the day, at night. The mood was so discouraged yesterday. They are rescue workers, and they had no one to rescue until this afternoon. Now, I know you and John Miller were trying to discuss the absolute number of people who had been found today. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to clear it up for you, but I'm going to give you some sense of how elated the rescue workers are down there that finally some people have been found alive. You're going to hear the voices of some of the people that were down there. One, a carpenter from Harlem, here in the New York area, who was volunteering, going in there on his own time. Then a fireman who seems so elated that they have found some people. The carpenter again, and then a second fireman. But they are up now that some people have been found alive. Just listen to him.
Today is a lot of good hopes today, because a lot of firemen is coming out. I see 5 firemen come out in the last 2 hours walking on their own feet.
And they've been buried this whole time?
They've been buried for 2 days, and they coming out there, and they coming out alive. So keep our hopes up. We should have a whole lot more living under there.
We were removing the debris. We had a large steel wall behind the beam. When they removed that, 2 firefighters just came crawling out. It was unbelievable.
What was your feeling after having been there yesterday, seeing nobody, no living come out?
Amazing. You can't believe it. The whole place went crazy. Everybody's screaming, chanting, just happy you could do something good.
How are they physically?
They walked out on their own. Let's take it from there. I think they'll be okay. They walked out, and that's amazing. And some good we'll get out of this. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
It's a much better day than it was yesterday, because yesterday all I seen was body bags.
A lot of body bags?
A lot of body bags.
Tell me how today is better than yesterday.
Because at least it gives you more hope to see the firemen. I mean, every time a fireman comes out of there, and that's all I have seen. I've only seen firemen. I haven't seen any survivors from the building. But everybody's cheering. USA, they're keeping strong, keeps the people working, keeps us happy. It gives us a reason to come back out here tomorrow, that's for sure.
All I know is 5 alive, 2 walked away. That means there's going to be more survivors. There's finally a good feeling coming out of this.
They were all firemen, sir?
Yes, ma'am, to my understanding.
That is a wonderful phrase. It is euphonic and it is euphoric. 5 alive, they're able to say. 5 firemen who were found today. 2, as they said, just walked away. We're not sure if a 3rd walked away, but all 5 are alive. And that, as you saw, gives a sense of hope to all those who are down on a site that has been so difficult. But I don't mean in any way to sugarcoat this. It is really a hellish scene, is being described by all of those who are down there. And so just as a counterbalance, I want to show you, Peter, a piece of videotape of another fireman who is down there who as he sat after a shift at the Trade Center site, he was talking on a cell phone to his mother, and also conversing a bit with reporters, but giving us some sense of just, there's no other word for it, just what a hell it is down there on the World Trade Center site. Take a listen.
All those signatures on my bandana are for guys that I fought with within the last 3 days, and 2 of them are dead. And I can't disclose their names. And my heart goes out. My heart goes out.
Will you be going back in?
I don't know. Maybe. Are you still there? You look. I love you, Ma.
I said this earlier, but Glenn Ray is talking to his mother. We just made contact with her in Long Island.
It's hell. I've been trying to beat a lot of stuff in my life. But it's hell.
Can I get some water, please? Can someone give me some water, please?
I've never seen anything like it. It's one of the worst things I've ever seen in my life. But we're all brothers. We all got to stick together.
So just some reflection of really the different emotions that exist for people that are on the site involved in the rescue. The hopefulness of the firemen having seen 5 of their brethren emerge, and that young carpenter who said so eloquently yesterday it was all body bags, and today it's live people, and that gives us hope. And then the other rescuer who has been in there talking to his mom and talking to reporters, just talking about what a hell it is with the body parts and the debris and the extreme depression that a lot of the fellows feel that are in there. So 2 snippets there, Peter.
Thanks very much, Charlie. 2 very important and more than snippets indeed. Thank you very much indeed for your continuing contribution. Now I want to go to the street and just have both Cynthia McFadden and ABC's Bob Jameson as we see other examples of unification on the street. And it's fascinating in the wake of this conversation we've just had about another very, very violent, troubled part and complicated part of the world to see the unity which exists here in the United States. It is just so extraordinarily different. There are a lot of airplanes, by the way, now on the move all over the United States, and I think in a couple of minutes we'll be able to give you a sense of what air travel and air traffic looks like throughout the United States and Canada today. But for the moment, let's go to Cynthia McFadden, who is on the street, and then to ABC's Bob Jameson. Cynthia.
Hi, Peter. I can tell you that things here have really increased in number. A huge crowd is gathered behind us, a couple hundred people lining the sides of the street, with word that some of these firefighters have been rescued and perhaps will be brought here. It's still a waiting game, of course. They have not yet been brought here. The number of press reporting from this location is also about quadrupled in size in the last hour and a half. But so far, the firefighters have not arrived. I can tell you a little bit about Governor Tommy Thompson's remarks, having gone inside and met with some of the survivors of the building collapse. He says that he came because the president wanted to make sure that the American people understood that we were doing everything possible, that there was no resource that wouldn't be provided to this, that he fully expected the $20 billion to go through, and that would just be the first round of funding. He said 2 important things, I think, to the people of New York. One is that the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, would immediately be coming to New York to test the quality of the air and water. We've talked a lot about the air and about the acrid smoke in the air and about the problem that the rescue workers are having breathing downtown. As you know, when the wind shifts, that air starts coming uptown. And they said the CDC testers would be here imminently to start testing the air. Water, of course, is also a concern. And he said that that should be happening any moment. There's a counseling line been set up nationally for anyone who wants to call and feels that they need support. That number is 1-800-331-7767. With the Commissioner Thompson was the Secretary of New York's Commissioner, Health Commissioner, Novello, and she said that the commissioners of health in Indiana, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey had all called her, offering any amount of resource. She says she expects to hear from other states as well. They both emphasized, Peter, that resources were not the problem. Resources are not the problem, but rather just getting to the people, that the problems at this point are simply a question of trying to get to anyone who still may be alive downtown. commenting about the number of people, the Commissioner of Health said that as to reports that there are tens of thousands of people buried, he believes the number is lower than that, but that there are no numbers. There are no official numbers, at least as far as he was willing to confirm on the record. And Peter, at this moment, it's pretty much hope. As you said earlier, it's the awkward, strange position that these doctors want someone to treat. The frustration is that they haven't been able to treat anyone so far. We're now in hour 38 since anyone has been brought out of the rubble to this hospital.
Thanks very much, Cynthia McFadden, downtown. On the subject of statistics about lower New York, the New York Department of Economic Development gives us a sense of the scope as well. 292,000 people live below 14th Street in New York City, and that is, so you have a better appreciation of it, equivalent to the population of Savannah, Georgia. And just to repeat that counseling hotline, which I hope I have right, which the Secretary of Health and Human Services mentioned, a counseling hotline is 1-800-331-7767, a counseling hotline set up by the Department of Health and Human Services, to which, by the sounds of it, anybody can call and seek answers. 1-800-331-7767. In Lower Manhattan, Bob Jameson. And Bob, we see from this vantage point another large cloud of smoke. It's not the same cloud of smoke, and there have been a couple of very random reports about at least another building in trouble from a structural point of view. How can you help us there? Bob Jameson, do you hear me?
Peter, I'm sorry. We were discussing the location of a vehicle with police and National Guardsmen. Could you please repeat the question?
By all means. I was simply asking you to bring us up to date on what you know, and pointing out that behind you I think we see a billowing plume of smoke, or a cloud of smoke, which we haven't seen in the last several hours. And there are very sporadic, so far unreliable reports, or not unconfirmed reports, of another building in difficulty and in danger of collapsing.
Well, to the smoke first, it has grown and receded throughout the day. Several hours ago, when all activity at the site of the former World Trade Center was stopped because of shifting rubble, there was a great deal of black smoke, much more intense than it is now. But it's testimony to how treacherous that debris is, because it is smoldering in one place after another, and from time to time, as it did this morning, it ignites into a rather vigorous fire. As to the structural integrity of buildings in that area, as we discussed earlier, there is so much concern that the fire department asked the Metropolitan Transit Authority today to shut down almost all subway traffic south of 42nd Street because of fear that the rumbling of the subway trains would have an effect on those buildings which are in some difficulty. Mayor Giuliani says that there are 12 buildings which, not related to the World Trade Center, which have been damaged. World Trade Center Building number 5 and the Millennium Hotel are considered to have serious structural problems. One additional difficulty in terms of the rescue mission and the size of the debris is that normally, as you know, in rescue operations after earthquakes, say, they use something called an LDR crane, which I think means long demolition reach. It's a lighter crane capable of doing much more delicate work than the normal construction crane, and weighs only half as much, only 100 tons as opposed to 200 tons for the normal crane that we see on construction projects. But some of this debris is so massive, some of those steel girders are so large that it has become a real challenge for those smaller cranes to do the more delicate work of moving the debris in the search for survivors.
Bob, what about the integrity of the New York subway itself? I simply haven't heard it mentioned in the last little while. In that particular part of town, is there concern about the subway itself?
There has been fear, Peter, since Tuesday. It was just Tuesday, I guess. Concern, Peter, since Tuesday that two key subway lines running from Lower Manhattan on the west side to Upper Manhattan on the west side had been cut because the subway station at the World Trade Center had collapsed, and now there is a new concern that those subway tunnels themselves have collapsed. And of course, that would be a serious long-term problem.
Okay, Bob, thanks very much. Bob Jamieson. There's a scene we haven't seen before of a fire rig itself, a fire department rig itself being towed out of the area. It goes without saying there's continued nervousness throughout the country. I want to go to Claire Shipman in Washington to put something to bed for us very quickly, if you would, Claire. We've heard at least one report that Lafayette Park, right underneath you, and the sidewalks near the White House are being cleared of people. The phrase used was evacuated. Can you look out your window and tell me if that's true?
Well, that's right. That's what we've been told, too, by people on the ground. And if you look out of the window behind me, you can see that it has emptied out a good bit. In fact, the crowd's never really picked up much after Tuesday, but it's quite empty right now. And what we're thinking at this point is that these could be those additional security measures that we talked about earlier that sources were telling us the Secret Service wanted to implement, perhaps closing yet another street. As you know, Pennsylvania Avenue in front of the White House is already closed to vehicles. There's been a lot of debate about whether that should be reopened. Obviously, that debate is probably all but finished for quite some time. But they may have decided they want to clear the area in front of the White House and Lafayette Park to pedestrian traffic as well, Peter, but we're waiting to hear.
Good, if you can, I mean, you've got a better view of anybody of that particular location. There are even some reports in San Diego that people are being evacuated from a certain area. And we put it forward simply as reporting at the moment, and we'll look forward to hearing immediately from someone in San Diego whether or not that is correct. But we are indeed now waiting in this next hour. It is now noon in the west. It is a little after 3 o'clock here in the eastern United States, in New York City. And as we wait to hear the White House briefing today, this is a day of briefings from government in many, many, many ways. And while we're waiting to hear from Mr. Fleischer and a number of other government officials, sometimes they tell us something, sometimes they don't, as you know. Here's a little more about what it feels like to live in this particular part of Manhattan today.
I just don't think anybody understands what it's like down here. I talk to people uptown, and even, you see it on TV, but it's nothing compared to being here. It's, we're in a war zone, and the cops said none of the stores are going to open. There's no food down here. There's a lot of elderly, and I just think I'm in shock.
We have no hot water, no telephone, which is not as bad as the building next to us, which has no electricity. And today's the first day I'm trying to get back to work, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to get back into the neighborhood. My wife went out last night in an ambulance because of the smoke.
It's like a very, very bizarre snow day when everybody's off from school and it's got that really eerie quiet to it, but there's no joy at all. And stuff is covered with white, but it's not the right kind of white.
And it's depressing. It feels like a science fiction movie. The reality still hasn't sunk in. And it feels like a ghost ship downtown. There are a lot of people moved out of the buildings. It's something I never thought I'd be a witness to. It's just a terrible, terrible scene. My heart goes out to all the people who were lost, and I'm just very proud of how people have banded together.
And that is a familiar scene. It reminds me in one respect of the disaster at Columbine High School in Colorado and how extraordinarily anxious the press was at the time to intrude on the agony of the high school students out there. I remember being on the edge of the high school on one of their playing fields, and they were all sitting around, and you wanted to very tentatively ask the kids if it was okay, but we were there, and if it was okay if we talked to them. And one of the things that I think everybody in the country sees today is how many people want to share with other people using television. I described television at the very beginning, where I quoted a great American historian, Daniel Burston, who told me when we started all this, saying that the television set in the country is a little bit like the campfire in the old days of the wagon train, where people have a chance to share a tragedy that might have occurred on the westward movement when people were going west. And now this is a real chance for us to share in the experiences which other people are having. Those of us who work in television think we know. Sometimes it's a sports magazine, sometimes it's a theater, this television thing for theater, for entertainment, sports stadium, of course. Sometimes it's a vehicle for news, but sometimes, as a very senior wise colleague of mine once said, it's also like a chapel to which we can all repair in times of national crisis, and boy, this is it, in order to share and exchange our views about what's going on. And we're very mindful of the issues for children. We've talked to a number of child psychologists in the last several days. All of us have had a chance to talk to our own children. In listening to a little earlier the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, who said he lost almost 700 employees, or 700 employees are missing, he's got 700 families. At least we have our own children to talk to. And there's so many questions people have on dealing with children. And at the risk of playing armchair psychiatrist here, you want to talk to people who know, and most parents have this own instinct themselves, to answer the questions which they have. Is there anything that kids can do or to help the victims? Should we allow our kids to dwell on the tragedy, or should we just get on with our normal routines? A lot of concern in the country about whether or not the tragedy will have a long-term effect on children, and by this, of children of every age. And what should I do if I'm too distraught to talk about this with my kids? A lot of us talking to our children in the last couple of days, appreciating to the depths of our being what it is to have our children, find ourselves in a bit of a mess as they are in a bit of a mess, and trying to talk to each other. It's okay for the kids to express anger. How do we answer the children's question, what's next? Incidentally, on Saturday morning on ABC, we've done this before with previous important issues to the country. We're going to have a program in which we'll try to answer children's questions, and we'll hear from children. I always find it a great experience, because very often children are just so much smarter than adults, and we adults get to look over their shoulders or listen over their shoulders and have them answer and ask questions that we're sometimes too embarrassed to deal with. That'll be on Saturday morning at 10 Eastern Time, so I am told by my superiors. Ari Fleischer, the president's spokesperson, is going to try to answer the press's questions, some of which we hope are your questions, in the next minute or so, about what the president has been doing today. We have a pretty good sense of what he has been doing today. He's talked a very public, unusually publicly intimate conversation between, as intimate as politicians can get in public, between the president, the mayor of New York, and the governor of New York. And they've talked many times, as the president pointed out, in the last couple of days. But it was very interesting to watch them today. It wasn't by any means an unguarded moment, but it was a very interesting conversation between political representatives. And the president has been on the phone to a lot of overseas leaders, so has the Secretary of State. The president has made it clear he's going to come here to look at this in person in New York City tomorrow as this work continues. He and every other political leader in the country has worked very hard, and in most cases very naturally, to identify as best they can with the struggle here and at the Pentagon. We must not lose sight of what is going on at the Pentagon. Pentagon officials say that their casualties are probably going to be about 190 dead and missing. They've already said publicly that 74 members of the Army, 42 of the Navy, none of the Air Force or the Marine Corps are either dead or missing. And the last time we checked in, which was a couple of hours ago, it's quite a frantic scene. Not frantic's not the word for it. It's a very busy scene there still. ABC's John McCarthy went outside this morning with the Secretary of Defense, Don Rumsfeld, and they walked up and looked at it together. And Mr. Rumsfeld said to John at one point that when this aircraft penetrated the building, you've heard us talk in the past about it only got through several rings of the Pentagon, but the Secretary told us this morning that the nose portion of the aircraft had got pretty far through, closer to that inner courtyard, which helps to make the Pentagon so familiar. On the subject of which, we have heard from our investigative unit recently that United Flight 93, the 757 which crashed in Pennsylvania, now taking a look at that wreckage, the front of the aircraft and the back of the aircraft, we are told by our investigative unit, is 6 miles apart. That's something we're definitely going to come back to. Here is Mr. Fleischer.
Good afternoon. I want to give everybody a report on the President's activities for the day, and then share with you some information about what the various agencies are doing to combat this terrorist attack. There is no evacuation of the OEOB. No. I'll be explaining everything. The President today has made a series of phone calls to world leaders. He has spoken to Prime Minister Koizumi of Japan, Prime Minister Berlusconi of Italy, Lord Robertson of NATO, Crown Prince Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, and Egyptian President Mubarak. As you know, earlier today he spoke with Mayor Giuliani and Governor Pataki to express his concerns about events up in New York and informed them, of course, that he will be going there tomorrow. The President also visited a local hospital today. I'm going to have a little bit more to say of that shortly. And beginning in just a few minutes, the President will meet with members of Congress from the Virginia area and the New York area to talk about the ongoing efforts of the federal government to be of assistance to the families and to the victims. Tomorrow will be a national day of prayer and remembrance. The President will attend a church service here at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., and the President is asking all Americans at their lunch hours to go and attend a church, a synagogue, a mosque, a place of their own choosing for worship, to say a prayer in assistance to the families and the victims of this horrible incident. As for the activities of the federal government, let me fill you in on several activities, including the one Helen just asked about. The Department of Defense will be announcing the names of those who are killed in the Pentagon disaster, if families have been notified, for those families that have been notified. The Department of Housing and Urban Development announced that they will direct all FHA-approved lenders to provide relief to families with FHA-insured mortgages affected by the recent attacks by providing additional mortgage flexibility and not to start or threaten foreclosure actions for at least 90 days. Secretary Martinez has also asked all major mortgage lenders, including those who are not insured by FHA, to consider providing relief to families as well. The Department of Treasury, in conjunction with the Department of Justice, has announced the deployment of agents from U.S. Marshal Service, U.S. Border Control, and U.S. Customs at designated airport security checkpoints throughout the country as part of the heightened security measures that have gone into effect. The Secret Service has expanded the security perimeter around the White House, this is what you have seen here, as a precautionary matter. All further questions that I'll refer to the Secret Service. The Department of Transportation, Secretary Mineta, has ordered that national airspace will be reopened to commercial and private aviation. They did so earlier this morning. Airports will reopen on a case-by-case basis only after implementing a more stringent level of security. The Department of Justice, in conjunction with the Department of Treasury, I indicated, has beefed up the security at the airports, and the President has directed Attorney General Ashcroft, and he announced it earlier today, to streamline the application, approval, and payment process for benefit claims of eligible survivors of firefighters, police officers, medical rescue personnel, and other public safety officers who died in the line of duty as a result of the act of terrorism in around our nation on September 11th, 2001. Secretary of Health and Human Services Tommy Thompson is in New York. He has announced that the Department of Health and Human Services will be working with the Federal Emergency Management Administration to provide coordinating counsel and service to victims, their families, and rescue workers. And the Director of the Environmental Protection Agency, Whitman, is also in New York today, and she'll be having a briefing at 5 o'clock. Finally, let me just say this. The President was very touched by his visit to the hospital today. At the hospital, he met with people who are in a burn unit now, who have survived some people are there as a result of the heroic actions they took in saving lives. The president met with one family where a mother stood by the bed of her son in the company of a soldier who rescued her son. And she said, "Mr. President, you have no idea how much this means to my family that you are here." He and Mrs. Bush were very touched by the courage that they saw at this hospital and by the determination of our nation and its military and all the people who were affected by this and the people in New York City. The President is also aware there are people in this room who haven't seen their children in days. The President is determined, his resolve is clear and strong, and America is united. And I'm more than happy to take your questions.
Ari, the president is not legally bound to seek a resolution from Congress authorizing the use of military force against whoever is responsible for these terrorist acts. And indeed, he already has a resolution from Congress showing solidarity in any response that he chooses to undertake. Why does the president believe it's necessary to have a separate resolution authorizing the use of military force?
Well, the president views this as a real show of unity by the United States Congress. This is a real result of the expression of the bipartisan, bicameral leadership that met with the president 2 days ago to discuss Congress's role in this matter. So while the premise of your question is accurate, per the Constitution, the president as commander-in-chief has authority vested in him to take actions as he deems appropriate. It is also a recognition of the unity of our nation as expressed by the Congress.
Can I do a follow on that, Ari, please? If it is actual war, as the president and others in the administration have declared, does he indeed not need a congressional approval to wage war on anyone? And the second part of the question, yesterday you said from that podium that the plane that hit the Pentagon was destined to hit here, and yet the plane came up from the south along I-95 and hit the West Wing. It doesn't seem to figure. Can you perhaps clarify it for us?
Well, on your first question, the answer is the same as I indicated to Mr. Roberts. The Constitution vests in the President the authority as Commander-in-Chief to take action that in that capacity he deems appropriate. Nevertheless, our nation should be heartened to see the joint action with the Congress as the United States government unites and the President and the Congress discuss the terms of any type of joint resolution that the Congress may offer. On the second question, I think we've really exhausted that topic. I've got nothing further to add.
All right. The President said this morning that he wanted to give Pakistan the opportunity to demonstrate that it can cooperate in this coalition he's trying to develop. State Department sources are telling ABC that the administration has asked the Pakistani government for permission to transit through its airspace in the event of a military operation, to close its borders with Afghanistan, and to stop providing fuel to the Taliban government. Why, and what would happen to Pakistan if it did not comply?
Terry, the President indicated that Pakistan has a chance to cooperate with the United States government, and the President is pleased to see that Pakistan may take this chance. Secretary Powell indicated earlier today that the United States government has friendly relations with Pakistan. I'm going to broaden your question and try to explain it to you in a broader context. When the President talks to these leaders, you know I'm not going to share with you any private information the President or others in the government expressed on any communications. If they did, I'm not saying they did.
There are government officials sharing that information, and it's pretty significant. Are we looking to transit through Pakistani airspace?
I'm not going to deal with any type of specifics about the actions that we are taking or are not taking with regions around the world or nations around the world. But let me say this. As the President calls world leaders, and as they join him in combating terrorism, the actions that the President is discussing with these leaders involve all forms of cooperation. It can be diplomatic cooperation, it can be military cooperation, it can be financial cooperation, it can be political cooperation. All of those are areas that are part of the coalition building that the President is discussing. Secretary Powell indicated earlier today that that is the purpose of all the phone calls. That can include any of those options.
And the President seemed to put Pakistan on notice. What if they don't comply? He said, we'll see what they mean by their agreement to cooperate. What if they don't?
Terry, I typically don't deal in hypotheticals. I certainly will not deal with them now.
Ari, if I could
follow
Kelly?
on that, though, in the sense, though, is the message that actions speak louder than words here, that the Pakistani government can say that it's pledging to stand united with the U.S. government, that it will do what it takes, but is it your sense or the White House sense that we want to see what the Pakistani government will do and that actions are more important than a statement?
This is the beginning of a process that can be lengthy. And the cooperation around the world is going to take many forms with the government of the United States. And the President, as you've seen by his actions today and the phone calls that he's making, which incidentally he will continue to make, are aimed at the various specific areas I mentioned. And the President understands that this is a process. It will take some time, and he will proceed throughout that process with resolve.
How significant, though, for the Pakistani government to come forward with such a statement? Was the U.S. putting some pressure on the Pakistani
Well,
government?
I'm going to let the State Department discuss that specific by specific, country by country. Suffice it to say, the President, as a general matter, is very pleased with the conversations I've been having with leaders around the world. The world is uniting against terrorism, and the President sees this as a real opportunity for the world to do something that can save generations and protect generations from something that obviously has wreaked havoc on our nation and has killed thousands.
Ari, could you tell us about what is happening in Lafayette Park, and could you also tell us whether the White House and Secret Service think that tourists and the American public are safe visiting the White House right now, and indeed are they safe visiting downtown Washington, D.C. and other parts of the city?
Yes, they are safe visiting the White House. Yes, they are safe visiting Washington, D.C. Suffice to say, it is not business as usual, and that's one of the reasons why the Secret Service has expanded the perimeter around the White House. But it is not business as usual. The President said to the American people the other day that the government will take all appropriate precautions, and that's what you're saying.
Ari, you opened the White House yesterday.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Rebecca.
Thank
Go
you.
back.
Is that a permanent expansion, and we'll be seeing further road closures in addition to Pennsylvania Avenue? What can you tell us about that?
The Secret Service will have the most authoritative answer on that, but my understanding is it's not permanent.
You reopened the White House yesterday to public tours and wanted to get that word out. How are you now rethinking that decision for some reason?
Let me check on the public tours. I don't know what the status of that is.
When Mr. Wolfowitz talked about putting an end to states that harbor terrorists, are you saying, did he mean to say that U.S. policy is to wipe out governments that sponsor terrorists?
Well, I can only say it in the President's words, and as the President said, the U.S. will use all our resources to conquer the enemy. And I think anybody who chooses to be America's enemy will have to think about what that means.
Ari, I apologize. I need to clarify one thing. I apologize.
Okay, and then we'll come back to it.
Just to clarify, we have people telling our reporters that they have been evacuated from the White House. Is that inaccurate?
No, there's no evacuation underway. If anybody in the OEOB is listening, there is no evacuation underway. These are security precautions that I indicated for precisely the reasons I indicated. Campbell? I believe the perimeter.
Are people being moved out of the EOB? No.
I just said no.
Lafayette Park?
Helen, I just said no. The perimeter is being expanded, but that deals with entree to the White House, but the White House will continue to have visitors. For example, there's a congressional delegation visiting now.
Can people be in Lafayette Park?
You have to check with the Secret Service. Why? Because the Secret Service knows exactly how their perimeters work.
Is there critical information of a new threat, or what prompted them to do this on day 3?
This is just ongoing security issues per the Secret Service.
I mean, they had a broader perimeter on the first day, then they came back. Now they're expanding it back out. Is this a result of some new information?
Jim, I think if you look across cities across the United States, if you look at all the actions that have been taken, as the President said, it's not business as usual. Security has been beefed up around the nation as a result of decisions that local security forces make as they see fit.
New information, or just they decided for today to expand it to Lafayette Park?
Yeah, I think the Secret Service can explain the reasons with better precision than I can, but the President did tell the nation it will not be business as usual, and I think what you're seeing is a sign of that. Campbell had it, yeah.
I know you don't want to go back to this subject, but the President, when he was asked today about the threat to Air Force One, said, "I will not discuss the intelligence that our country has gathered," and yet you and other senior administration officials have discussed the intelligence. Does he have a problem with that? Is there some sort of different policy? Is this something that he has authorized you to share with us?
What the President said is he's not going to discuss how the sources and the methods for how any information is collected, and that's exactly in keeping with what I've done and what I've said.
But
Prior to your statement yesterday on that subject, no law enforcement agency involved in this, the FBI, the Secret Service, any of the branches of the military, gave any hint that Air Force One had been a target. And so clearly, once you put that out there, people are going to want to know more information about whether or not that's a credible assertion. Well, I think that people understand it's credible.
Harry, this morning you would not, you could not nail down what was the purpose of the president's phone calls regarding coalition. But this afternoon you come back with an answer that the president's really asking world leaders for military, financial, so forth, help. Is that right? Do I have that right?
That's exactly what I said.
Okay. Is there a coalition now being formed formally?
I don't think you can say formally, the president. This is exactly what you would expect. This is what presidents do. At a time like this, the President of the United States, as the leader of this country, talks to his colleagues around the world, prime ministers and presidents.
Is he asking for specific sums and men in uniform and so forth to join in an effort?
He's asking for what I just indicated.
It's more than moral support, though.
That's a fair statement.
It's practical action in response to terrorism.
That's correct.
When the president spoke in the Oval Office, he seemed to go beyond just terrorists and those who harbor terrorists to say those who encourage their actions. And I wonder, what did he mean by that? And which of the world leaders was he trying to send a message to, or did he discuss that with? Because it seemed to go beyond what he's already said.
Well, no, I think when the president talks about those who carried out this act and those who harbor them, obviously those who harbor them have encouraged them. So it's one and the same. Jim?
If I could finish, how many world leaders has he spoken to since the beginning? And can we get a list of all of those?
Well, I've been announcing them day by day. I'd have to go back and just pull it, but that's publicly available. You've got it all. I mentioned yesterday he spoke to President Putin twice, President Jiang, Blair, Chrétien, I believe Chirac, Schroeder. So you can do the math.
Okay, since I have your attention, just one last bit of that.
Three questions.
When do you think Washington will return to normal? And what is normal now that this has happened?
I think for the American people, not just for Washington, but for the people of New York City and for the people of Washington, it's going to take some time. There was an attack on the soil of the United States of America, and people should not expect this to be over overnight. Jim?
Yeah, Secretary Powell has said that bin Laden is the prime candidate for these terrorist acts. Is that the view of the White House? And secondly, can you straighten out for us whether or not the administration intends to use military personnel as sky marshals or in any other way to secure civilian aircraft flights?
On your first question, I think what the Secretary said was he was asked a question about is bin Laden a suspect, and he indicated yes. I don't think he said prime, but I'd have to check the record on that. But he did indicate yes. On the question of the military, Jim, I'll have to find out from the Department of Transportation. When you asked me this morning, I tried to refer you to transportation. I don't have that information here.
Secretary Mineta said they're going to use the Delta Force. Then an administration official said Mineta was flat wrong, that was not going to happen. And the Pentagon indicated they might use military people to train. Almost everyone seems to have a slightly different version of whether or not military people will be used in civilian law enforcement.
Let me see if I can't get to the bottom of it. Connie? Connie?
May I have two questions? Do you have any special words for what the United Kingdom has done? The statements they've made are very strong, and today they played the Star Spangled Banner when they had to change in the guard.
Yeah. And I noticed today also the United States is not the only nation that mourns. The United Kingdom has lost the lives of many of their citizens. Other nations also had their citizens working in the World Trade Center. And so it's a further expression of the wonderful solidarity that the world is showing with the United States. I think it's very touching for the United Kingdom to play America's national anthem.
One more question. Can there be war without a formal national enemy?
Well, as the President has indicated, this is a different type of enemy in the 21st century. The President said this enemy is nameless. This enemy is faceless. This enemy has no specific borders. This enemy does not have airplanes sitting on tarmacs. It does not have ships that move from one port city to the next. It is a different kind of enemy. Having said that, the President also knows that our nation's military is capable of carrying out whatever mission is assigned to it to conquer any enemies. Keith?
The answer to John's question is that the White House view that whatever action is taken and whatever the scale and duration of the action, that you need no further approval from Congress. You'd like something from Congress, but you don't need anything else from Congress.
I'll say it for the third time. The Constitution vests in the President, as Commander-in-Chief, the authority to take actions he deems necessary to protect and defend the United States. The President is also very encouraged as a result of working with Congress on this joint resolution, which is a real show of unity from the Congress, and the White House will work with Congress on that language.
So that's a yes, right? That's a yes. You need no further approval.
I think I've made it very clear. Go ahead. Gene, you haven't asked yet. Gene, go ahead.
Yeah, just to follow on that note, the War Powers Act does call for approval of if troops are going to be put in harm's way.
Gene,
Now-
as with many previous administrations, there are questions about the constitutionality of some aspects of the War Powers Act, and this administration shares those questions.
Yeah, but in most of those previous cases, we're looking at largely air assaults. But is it your position that
Actually,
even...
that's not accurate. There have been some 125 military actions that took place in the United States, and I believe only 5 involved declarations of war.
Secretary Powell, can you tell us anything about special security precautions tomorrow for the President's trip to New York? Are there going to be fighter jets on each wing of Air Force One, for example, like they were on Tuesday?
Well, actually, I do not know the answer to that question, and if I did, I'm not sure I'd be able to share it in all cases. But suffice it to say, the President has full confidence in the Secret Service and those who protect him.
Will he travel with full contingent? Will he, the usual presidential motorcade that we see, this enormous beast that lands in a place and takes over a town, will he do that in New York?
I think Terry will be a smaller, enormous beast.
Travel, you said that we wouldn't go to New York as long as his being there would create a hindrance to those trying to rescue workers, people
Exactly
cleaning
right.
up the debris. When they're still pulling people alive out of that rubble, how do you keep him out of the way and from being a distraction?
Because in conversations with Mayor Giuliani and Governor Pataki, they talked about how it would be appropriate and meaningful for the President to go to New York. And so all factors are taken into consideration. And of course, the President wouldn't go under any other circumstances.
So are you saying he'll keep his distance from actual ground zero?
Well, you'll see, just as when he visited the Pentagon yesterday. You'll see tomorrow. Go ahead. Go ahead.
You talked about the business or the individuals with mortgage help, et cetera. What about the businesses that have been wiped out? Where is the administration thinking of putting some help in that direction?
Well, also as a result of the $20 billion supplemental appropriation bill that is moving its way through Congress, that will provide the means to give assistance to many people, businesses, otherwise, all who have suffered in this.
Secretary
Paul?
Powell saying bin Laden is a prime suspect. Is the administration, the U.S., confident, or does the U.S. know of his whereabouts, where he is?
I'm not going to give any answers to that question.
If I could come back to
Since the
Go ahead.
mid-1970s, the U.S. has had an executive ban in place on assassinations. Is the President considering lifting that?
All the President's actions will be in concert with all laws, and I have no information for you beyond that.
Former
President Bush. Jim, go ahead.
On that point, is there anything, any restriction that the administration believes is hampering the intelligence community's efforts to deal with terrorists? Are there any restrictions either self-imposed by the agency or by the intelligence community or by Congress that you think need to be eliminated?
I have not heard any such conversations. As always, on all these matters, as the President indicated today, the government will keep you informed of any steps it thinks are necessary, but I have not heard anything. I want to go to somebody who hasn't asked anything yet. Go ahead.
On the $20 billion supplemental, LMB, as he knows, says there's only $1 billion left in fiscal year 2001 that's on budget, or that's not Social Security. Is it accurate to say that that money can still be expended and be considered without use of Social Security surplus funding, depending on the timing of when that funding is released?
Well, I think there's been a virtual, universal, if not universal, recognition by members of the Congress and by the President that our national security will always come first. So, go ahead.
Purposes then, this is considered a severe emergency, and therefore it's money that's being taken from the Social Security surplus.
I indicated
fund
2 days ago that this was a severe emergency.
OMB is giving differing advice that it depended on the time that the money is actually spent, and that it does not necessarily mean you even have to use those funds. I'm just trying to get that clarified.
I indicated this is a severe emergency. I also said that the fiscal year, of course, does not close to September 30th, so we'll know more at that time. But national security will come first. So go ahead. Go ahead.
The word war is being bandied around here so much, but that word in and of itself carries such a constitutional connotation, et cetera, and creates a confrontation with Congress or whatever. Is it possible we'll see a ratcheting down of the rhetoric with the administration?
I think you're going to see consistent actions by the administration and statements of resolve and determination by the president, just as you've been seeing. So go ahead. Go ahead.
The 1991 war resolution that Congress passed put some limitations on what the president could do. Would that be satisfactory, something like that be satisfactory to this President Bush? Or would you like something that is less, is more open-ended?
You know, we're dealing with hypotheticals here. Congress today is considering a joint resolution to express its support for the president as a show of unity. And we're talking with the Congress very productively about the appropriate language to use in that. And that's where the administration is focused today.
You would see this as more of a general resolution of support and not the kind of thing that his father got from Congress in 1991.
Well, to be parliamentary, it is a joint resolution. So.
Did you understand my question? I mean, I'm saying, well, it's one thing to pass a, resolve we support the president, and quite another to pass what was enacted in 1991, which said the president can take military action under these
Yeah, I think this is all very public. This is a joint resolution that is going to move on Capitol Hill, and you'll be able to review the language of it yourself. And I think there are going to be some comparisons that may be apt to 1991, others that will not be. This is 2001, and this is different.
Did the White House suggest language for this?
Sure. We're working with Congress on the language.
As law enforcement officials proceed in trying to apprehend individuals inside the United States who may have knowledge or have been involved in the attacks, what is the president telling law enforcement officials in terms of what actions can they take? Should people be prepared to see, say, phone taps that haven't been used in the past? What kind of civil liberties the president thinks should be protected or suspended?
I think you need to talk to the Attorney General about the actions that they are taking. All will be in accordance with the law, of course.
Earlier today, White House officials expanded on the threat against Air Force One, saying that there was a telephone threat to the Secret Service, that Air Force One was on a target list. As the 3 successful attacks were all sneak attacks with no prior warning, why did you put credence in the telephone threat?
Again, you're getting into evaluations that involve the area of how the administration, or in this case, Secret Service, the White House, obtains information. And I think we've exhausted that. Go ahead.
Earlier today, the president said that fighting terrorism would be the main focus now of the administration. I'm curious, what does that do now in the pipeline to other priorities, education and so on?
I think if you talk to the American people, you will hear from them directly and from their hearts that our nation has no higher priority than the security of our people. Make no mistake, American soil has been attacked, and I think the American people fully understand and appreciate what the president said. It is a reflection of what the American people are thinking and are feeling, and the president shares those thoughts.
The severity of the problem, but his own thinking, how does he now sort of program or sequence some of these other items on his agenda?
Well, the domestic agenda will continue. The president will continue to work with Congress. I think that the pace of action will be determined by the Congress, and of course the administration will remain engaged with the Congress on all these issues. In fact, there's a meeting that will begin shortly, if it hasn't begun already, that I will need to go to with congressional leaders and the president. So.
Does the president believe, as a general rule, that Congress ought to, in the interest of unity, ought to set some of these controversial issues aside and do them maybe next year specifically?
Keith, I think what you're going to see is Democrats and Republicans alike uniting on all kinds of areas. I can't guess with specificity what the domestic future will look like, but based on the meeting that the president had with the congressional leaders yesterday, I think it's fair to say that there's a different domestic mood.
In the
So they
president's
should put
remarks,
those things aside then, is that correct? Do them next year,
Well,
face rise and so forth?
Our nation's leaders in Congress remain men and women of principle, and they will take the actions that they think are in the national interest. And I think as events unfold on the domestic front this fall, the leaders of Congress and the rank and file of Congress will show those principles, and our government will unite.
in the president's remarks,
Former President Bush spoke today and expressed dissatisfaction with the quality of our human intelligence. Does the current President Bush, share his father's concern about failures in human intelligence? And if so, what does he plan to do about it?
Jay, at an appropriate time, the president will be more willing to look back, but his focus right now is on what needs to be done in the wake of the attack on the United States.
That seems a very appropriate place, as Mr. Fleisch is going over some of the same ground with many reporters, to move on from this to some of the other issues and news of the day, saying, because former President Bush, 41st President of the United States, was talking today about some of the failures of intelligence in the country. He'd heard a lot of people comparing this to Pearl Harbor, and he said when he was giving a speech, was one of the few people in the room who was alive at the time of Pearl Harbor, and pointed out just how different it was in many respects, and of course what the similarities were. And just quickly to pick up some of the highlights from Mr. Fleischer here, there has been no levity in the last couple of days, but when my colleague Terry Moran, referring to the president's visit to New York tomorrow, asked whether or not the president would come, as presidents often do, to New York City with huge motorcades and huge numbers of people, if that would be the case tomorrow, Mr. Fleischer did answer, and with a slight smile, it will be a smaller, enormous beast than it usually is. And he, of course, reassured everybody that the president was fully confident about the security around him, and that obviously includes the president's visit to New York tomorrow. On the question of security, he was asked several questions about the Secret Service expanding the perimeter around the White House. Claire Shipman, who's right opposite the White House, had looked down just a little while ago to see that there were fewer people on Pennsylvania Avenue in front of the White House. Remember, there was a candlelight vigil there last night, and it does indeed seem to be quieter. And the Secret Service has expanded the perimeter. We do not know precisely to where, nor did Mr. Fleischer answer as to why it was larger on day 3 than it had been on day 1. He said the Secret Service can speak for itself. Of course, the Secret Service rarely speaks for itself, which a great many people think, at least in public terms, it should be. As to Washington getting back to normal, he said the obvious thing, it will take time. The president paid that visit to the hospital. We saw a little bit of it earlier today, and he explained how moved the president had been at seeing and talking to some of the people in the burn unit. Beyond that, when he concluded there, he said, when you talk to the American people, there is no higher priority than the national security. Now, there's some other things going on. There's this whole question of whether firefighters have actually been rescued from the rubble downtown today, and Frank Gribben, who's the spokesman for the New York Fire Department today, says he knows nothing of 4 or 5 firefighters who have been trapped in the rubble since the beginning being removed, rescued from the rubble today. There were these reports that they'd been trapped in an SUV since Tuesday, and some news organizations are reporting that. Frank Gribben, says he's not aware of any firefighters being rescued today, but some rescue workers were freed from the rubble today. The chairman and CEO of the New York Stock Exchange says that the trading on the exchange is going to resume at 9:30 on Monday morning. We'll come back and deal with that. And let us now change direction just a little. It's really the same direction, of course. The Congress is asking Americans to fly the Stars and Stripes in 30 days in response to the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. And as one member of the Congress, Ike Skelton, a Democrat from Missouri, said, flying the flag shows that we shall not be daunted. All across the country, we are seeing flags being flown and encouraging people to fly the flags. There's something of a grassroots effort to have a flag day on September the 14th being spread via the email and the internet, and we'll see whether or not that works its way into officialdom before very long. But this whole question of America coming together, and we've seen lots of ramifications of that, America coming together in this crisis at every level has been very apparent in all of our investigation of the country today. Let's continue it by talking to some Americans with a sense of history, with a sense of experience in terms of other disaster, and a couple of, dare I say it, everyday Americans as well. First of all, here's a brief report from ABC's Dean Reynolds on some of what we find happening in the country today.
Peter, it seems that the people here, though removed from the tragedy by many miles, nonetheless feel close to the victims and are doing what they can to help them. Business roared back to life at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange today. It had been closed since Tuesday morning, but officials felt it was time to show the world that America has not been crippled.
I think there is a definite desire on the part of a lot of people on this floor and throughout the financial services community to show that we are in business, we're able to conduct business effectively.
And they conducted it while sporting American flags on their coats and on the desks, ringing the trading floor in red, white, and blue. Beneath screens that 2 days ago had showed the carnage from New York and Washington, the traders this morning went about their trillion-dollar day of transactions. And the Mercantile Exchange dug into its own pockets.
Our executive committee authorized a $1 million contribution toward the establishment of a foundation that will support the relief efforts and the victims and survivors of the tragedy and their families.
Elsewhere in Chicago and its suburbs, there were memorial services almost too numerous to count.
We gathered early in the day to the news that one of our pastors was believed to have been aboard the American Airlines flight that had hit the World Trade Center.
Throughout our country's history, we have called on God to bless and guide us, to unite us as a people, no matter our ethnic or religious or racial background. And this we do today.
There's word that some Chicago police and firefighters on their own time have driven to New York to help out. And people are still lining up for hours to give blood, doing what they can. Peter?
Thanks very much, Dean Reynolds, who's out there in the Midwest today trying to get a feel for the country, and it seems to be pretty unanimous in many parts of the country. But we want to talk now to three people who have a real sense of the country in times of crisis. We're joined first by Governor Frank Keating, the governor of Oklahoma, and I apologize, Governor Keating, for keeping you waiting. It would only been a White House briefing that had kept us up.
It's been fascinating and very, very thorough coverage, and I've enjoyed it.
Well, thank you, sir, and we'll get back to you in 1 second
Sure.
as we introduce the other people we want to talk to. Our resident historian at ABC, Michael Beschloss, who has an infinite sense of the country at times of crisis, who is in our Washington Bureau. And from New Jersey today, Gary Potenzone, who is the owner of the Apollo Flag Company in Totowa, New Jersey, where people have been lining up at his stores since 6 a.m. today, wanting and trying to buy the American flag. And Mr. Potenzone, am I saying it correctly? Is it Potenzone or Potenzone?
No, Potenzone, Peter.
Okay. Mr. Potenzone, let me just ask you first. I know you're selling a lot of flags, but what are people saying that are coming into the shop?
They're saying they want to show their support. It's been a real close-knit people coming in. They're helping each other. They're talking to each other about their concerns, and it's such a nice feeling. It's something we haven't ever seen. Different than the Desert Storm thing. That was more, let's get them, let's get them. This is more unity.
And have you sold just as many flags as you have?
We sold out probably around 1:30. We went through today about 27,000 flags. Yesterday about 25,000. And we're expecting some more in this evening and tomorrow morning again.
And you are one of...
We're trying to keep up with it.
And you're one of thousands of flag companies in the country, of course.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah. So what are your own...
a little company?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead, please.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm just very, very happy to see the true patriotism. You know, the feeling is so close, like I said, and so united.
Is this like anything you've ever seen before?
No, not at all.
And when you talk to
We've been in the...
Go ahead.
Yeah, we've been in the flag business for 3 generations, and even talking to my elders that were around during World War II and Korean War, nothing like this. This is something totally different. This is so much warmth, and like I said, people just want to show that they're all together as one.
So you also believe it is as a play of patriotism, but also an expression of unity?
Definitely, definitely unity.
And do you get much time to talk to your customers this morning or today?
Every customer has a comment. That's what I like also. It's not just a bunch of grumpy people buying a flag because they want to join the crowd. It's people that really want to talk about what's happening. They had a loved one that was there and got out and they're happy, or a lot of people are here before they go to the city to help in the rescue. We've had a lot of fire departments in. We've had a lot of ambulance squads in, and we're trying to take care of them first, of course, and give them as best attention as we can.
Now, what are your own thoughts about what's happened to the country in the last couple of days?
Oh, it's terrible what happened, but it's good in a sense that it has brought us together. In the flag business, we've seen such a lag in patriotism and unity. People have been off course. I think this is pulling them onto course. In the past 5 years, we've sold periodically every year more foreign flags than American flags. Finally, in one day, we've sold more American flags than we did in the whole year of foreign flags, and it feels good.
That's quite extraordinary. Please don't go anywhere, because I want to hear from Governor Frank Keating, the governor of Oklahoma. Governor, the last time you and I talked under circumstances like this was the very first night of the Oklahoma City bombing, when you were amazingly eloquent on behalf of the people of Oklahoma City and the state of Oklahoma. Give us your thoughts on the state of the nation as seen from Oklahoma today.
Well, obviously, we're a part of America, and we have prayed with our friends in Washington and New York. We've given blood. We were one of the first states asked to give blood because we test our blood and give probably twice the average of the country. And we've also offered all the FEMA rescue people the guidance and advice, spiritual, psychological, that we could. Everything that we can do, obviously, we will do to pay back New York and Washington for what they did for us. But really, everything is darkly very similar. And as this gentleman said previously, out of evil good comes, and the fact that we can come together as a people is something we saw here. No looting after 320 buildings damaged or destroyed. That was an extraordinary statement of good citizenship, civic pride, and goodness. And so I think as all this tragedy recedes, the people hopefully will come together. We will heal the sick. We'll identify those responsible and punish them. But then the long process of rebuilding will take place personally and as well as physically, and that's a difficult process. But it is very darkly similar to what we saw in 1995.
Tell us something by way of advice about the long process of rebuilding personally and internally.
Well, the first thing we noted was that 30 children after our bombing lost both of their parents. And well, who was going to take care of them? Who was going to educate them? We had a lot of money that came in unannounced, unsolicited. We had 170 children who lost one of their parents. So we made a battlefield decision. We were going to take this money to put every child through college who lost one or both parents or who was severely injured in the bombing. And that's underway. Kids, 100 and probably 30 or 40 kids are in college as we speak. So those kinds of decisions obviously ultimately will be made. The most important thing now, obviously, is to rescue and recover. After that, identify who's responsible and punish them. But I'm real impressed. The story is an anecdotal, I don't know, about shoe store owners coming out and giving slippers and sandals to people who don't have any shoes or who were trying to get away from the bombing. They had high-heeled shoed women. I mean, that's an example of the America that many of us thought went away in the 50s, and that's certainly very good news that it still is alive and well.
You raised something terribly important in terms of citizenship and the longing for a period when it seemed to be much more prevalent in people's lives. Is that something you feel strongly in the heartland, that a sense of citizenship without a crisis is lagging?
Well, I think that is a problem. I think that Americans are fundamentally good people. We're an extraordinarily generous people. We talk about these individuals who may have done this illegal or perhaps legal immigrants. We admit legally, Peter, more people in 1 year than all of the other nations of the world combined do in 1 year. This is the shining city on the hill, and I think we don't want to lose that. I think the strength of our economy, the strength of our society is its diversity, but also it's important that we not balkanize. And tragedies like this do bring people together. And what is amazing to people in Oklahoma or any state except New York is that they're seeing in New York something that they didn't think existed in New York, namely a civically spirited citizen. I think that's a joyous statement for the goodness of and the heroism, the courage of these New Yorkers. We had the New York firefighters and police officers here in Oklahoma City in 1995. Ray Downey, one of my dear friends, apparently killed in the bombing there in New York, and his son as well. These were very giving people, courageous, heroic people that give their lives for others. A wonderful statement of American goodness, and I'm very proud to be an American today.
And Governor Keating, what do you think Americans can do at the moment to perpetuate this sense of togetherness and citizenship that is so evident across the country today?
Well, I think what President Bush proposed, tomorrow is a national day of mourning, but he also said everyone should go to their mosque or synagogue, their church, their parish, whatever the denomination or religion they might belong to, and go to church tomorrow at noon. Commit themselves to be a better citizen, a more spiritual citizen, a more moral person. You know, hug their kids, spend more time with their family, recognize the genius of America, the rule of law, representative government society, where we expect people to be their very best. We will never forgive nor forget evil done to us, and we didn't here in Oklahoma City. We got those responsible, but we try to make ourselves a better society as a result. And here we've never felt better about ourselves, ever, than we do now after the rebuild, after the bombing. And so out of evil, good can come.
It is true, I know, and I keep talking to you because we're about to lose the satellite and lose you, so let me take advantage of the last couple of minutes. We do know that Oklahoma City, in many ways, is a very different, much developed, much changed city since the bombing. Have you seen in the wake of the bombing, and is there a lesson here for the rest of us, that the city and the character of the people has been remade into something better even?
I think so, and I know that you think, oh, that guy's a politician, he's going to be a Chamber of Commerce representative for his people, but I watch polls. I can see how people think of themselves. Our kids are working harder. I think we're working better as a people together. I think the religions and the races and the cultures of our community are together more than they've ever been, and we're rebuilding the state. We're building a dome on our Capitol. Ours is the only Capitol unfinished, other than the Capitol in Washington that Lincoln finished in 1864. We're doing the same thing here, all with private money, and we're celebrating that renaissance of our state. So good can come from evil.
Well, Governor Keating, you are a politician, and I wouldn't expect you, and we all know that. We all know what kind of leadership you exerted at the time of the Oklahoma City bombing, and I'm sorry you're not going to be able to stay with us, but I'm very grateful to hear you today.
Thank you
Governor
very much,
Frank Keating, and everything else we hear about Oklahoma City, of course, is pretty clear indication that what the governor says about its development in the wake of the bombing is absolutely true. It is now 4 o'clock in the eastern United States as we see one of millions of Americans taking a moment to simply stop and stand and consider that we will, speaking on behalf of himself and others, we will not let them destroy the spirit, and Governor Keating making it just indelibly clear that that is the way they feel in the heartland of the country. Now I want to talk to Michael Beschloss, who is our resident historian. Michael, who's in the Washington Bureau. Michael, the governor referred to a longing for an earlier time. In his case, he mentioned for the 1950s. Put this in some kind of historical context for this. The country has not been through anything quite like this before.
No, we never have, and obviously that's one thing to always remember whenever you use any kind of a historical analogy, even one like Pearl Harbor that we've heard over the last couple of days. But you know, Peter, I think the one thing that really occurs to me looking at it through history